so evil. It's almost like if you had a video game and the point of the video game was to be as evil as possible to as many black people in Africa as possible. Like, and then making it so that they like trying to get it so they're drinking urine and feces. That's the most insane, evil thing, man.
Say where secret unknown locations where underground bases where the Illuminati meet, we'll say that way. And if they want to, I'd like for you guys to give a little bit of an introduction as far as you're comfortable in terms of you guys as just a little bit of a background, and then get into what you guys cover on the podcast, and then we'll start in on our Anya Taylor Joy analysis. And we're doing this because they did their podcast on Anya Taylor Joy. I had done one some years back on her with Greg Carlwood over at Higher Side Chats. We had, when Split came out, we did an Anya Taylor Joy analysis, and then when Northman came out, we did Northman. I did a breakdown of Last Night at Soho. So they did one, and I thought, hey, why don't we team up and let's do one together and compare notes. So tell us about you guys.
Something very similar to Jay's esoteric Hollywood stuff, deep dives and close readings for specific directors and specific concepts. Our big thing over the last few months has been Joker stuff, and we'll be doing that for a while. We've unfortunately been having to watch a lot of Jared Leto movies for our current round of research, but we'll be doing other actors who played the Joker as well. But that's what we do, is we just do these deep dives with connections of Hollywood PsyOp to broader series of PsyOp within culture, and seeing what these films, these directors can tell us about these broader patterns of elite worldviews, with a specific eye to the intersections of the occult and espionage and transhumanism. A lot of these themes that'll be familiar to your audience. We kind of leverage our research backgrounds with those things to understanding film. And with Anya Taylor Joy in particular, I was glad that we got to do to set up this episode with you, because there's a few of her movies that we've talked about, in particular a couple of them that Brett has covered on his Monarch series, which is a Patreon exclusive, and people should definitely check that out on our Patreon if they want to hear these really amazing deep dives that Brett does into specifically Monarch mind control themed films. And he looked at both the New Mutants, this X-Men horror movie that's very important, that has her in it, as well as Last Night in Soho. And not long ago, we decided to put up the Soho episode in on our main feed. And when we did that, I just kind of glanced over Anya Taylor Joy's whole career and recorded an addendum to what Brett had done, and just was like, wow, this is a very, let's say, interesting background. And then the consistency of the patterns of these themes of trauma-based mind control in her movies, it's really staggering. And just seeing even within a cluster of like just a couple years when she's starting out in other sectors in her career, just this kind of output with these movies. The couple music videos that she's done, I think, are important, and I could talk about that a little bit. The like all the stuff in terms of her fashion industry stuff, modeling, just like a lot of the one eye stuff, the triangles and all of that pop up with her more than it tends to with other people, perhaps. So all these things make her, I think, just kind of a lightning rod for the type of interest all three of us have into Hollywood and the entertainment industry and its significance. And these movies, their depictions of psychic fragmentation, trauma-based mind control, are very revelatory. So since you've covered her and we've covered her, and we'll probably cover her in more detail, that's kind of the idea for this episode.
Yeah, Brad, did you want to talk a little bit about your background and catch us up on what made you want to look into these?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm like you. I mean, I was a film nerd, starting back in the 90s when I was a teenager, and I got into them, I guess I would say, for basically like aesthetic reasons apart from entertainment, and so I really kind of drank that sort of new Hollywood Kool-Aid about that, auteur artist as transgressor, and about film as like pushing boundaries. So I wasn't like into the dark slasher stuff and some of the more degenerate aspects, but you sort of run up against, especially in the art films too, you run up against really gross stuff. I mean, the closer you get to high art, that'll come up, and when we talk about the menu, right, the closer you get to sort of high art, the closer you're getting to this like inversion and degeneracy. And
right.
So, I mean, over the years, I mean, I got into, I won't tell my whole story, but I mean, I got into like the symbological side of it, right? Through like Jungian depth psychology and Joseph Campbell and that sort of stuff. So I saw, films as collective dreams and as ways to sort of read the collective psyche. And I mean, the conspiracy stuff, I mean, I was always interested in, we talked about that before, kind of X-Files level sort of conspiracy stuff and JFK, whatever, 9/11. But I mean, the cultural conspiracy stuff that I've discovered in the last several years, only honestly, and through reading like people like Dave McGowan and stuff, and then really looking into those claims and finding like, wow, like that's kind of what I was personally missing. I think it's a block for a lot of people because they like entertainment, they like to consume these things, and it should be obvious to them that they're being used to manipulate them.
And I did see the Dior commercial, which was very bizarre in terms of the symbolism there as well. So to me, she seems kind of like a new Milla Jovovich coming out of the fashion world. Most of the films end up dealing with dissociation, multiple personality, DID, MPD. And so that's now her, like she's sort of taking on that new place in pop culture as a fashion world driver. We just did Zoolander, which, the theme of the first Zoolander is precisely that. The fashion world is this culture driving, culture changing, culture toxifying creation that not just drives sexual taboos to the next level or whatever, but also changes. It also has this theme of sort of the runway model being this sort of robotic, mind controlled sort of thing that's like a puppet on a string. I mean, that's every time I watch these people doing their weird runway stuff, that's what I think of. And then also you've got the fact that Zoolander has them being essentially programmed to not just be culture drivers, but also to be something more than that. Assassins, right? They're supposed to assassinate. Derek Zoolander is supposed to assassinate the Malaysian prime minister over sweatshop labor. So, all of these things come up in various ways in today's discourse. Not saying that we know that Anya Taylor Joy is somehow mind controlled. She could be, I don't know, but as we were discussing in DMs, she does have an interesting history with her family in that I think her grandmother, or her mom's dad, I should say, was a British ambassador, which typically suggests high level connections, and probably coming that her family comes from a intelligence background, which could be the basis for why she would be involved in some of these. Not saying she doesn't have talent or anything like that, that it's not but we're going to talk about today Menu, Morgan. We may touch on some of the other ones that have been discussed in the past. We're going to talk about Marrowbone. These are all ones that none of us have really dived deep into yet. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how you guys want to approach these, as well as the 2 music videos, the Hozier video, the Grand Theft Auto video, the Dior commercial. We'll touch on Last Night in Soho as well. So what do you guys think? Do you think she's like another kind of like another, because that fashion world, and then she, like Milla Jovovich, she also has a record, right? Like she sings on Last Night in Soho. That was kind of popular. I think she had about 6 million views on her song from Last Night in Soho. And when Milla Jovovich first started, she was coming out of the fashion world and the modeling world, and then she immediately had a successful song, which a lot of people don't remember her song, but she had a hit that was before she was in any movie. She was like had one single that was pretty popular. I forget the name of it, but The Man Who's Forgot, or I forget what it is, but I used to have that CD back in the day. But anyway, so there's a lot of parallels to that, to Milla. And Milla has an interesting background too, with a history of in terms of Ukraine, and she's kind of said things that she's professes at least to be publicly Russian Orthodox, and publicized the baptism of her child many years ago at the Russian Orthodox, the Rokor Church, I think. It might have been MP Church, I don't remember, but so there's a very interesting background with Milla as well. So where you guys want to go next? It doesn't matter if we want to pick one of the videos or one of the movies.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just mention, I'll just riff a little bit about what you were saying about her background, and then I suspect Brett might have something to say about the Jovovich connections there, just based on his own work tracking these patterns. But yeah, without making any specific claims or being overly speculative about her background or how all these things work, it is just very interesting that this really upper crust British society backgrounds. Like you said, her mother's father was an English diplomat, and then her father is this British Argentinian former banker, businessman, Dennis Taylor. So he's an OBE and MBE recipient. So just kind of real elite society kind of guy. But then this kind of globe-trotting types that they were. She was actually born in Miami before being raised in Argentina for the first years of her life, and then later teenage years. I don't know exactly the timeline. Ends up in London, and then despite all that, it's supposedly just a kind of complete happenstance how she breaks into the fashion industry, that she's just walking her dog in London, and then the head of a modeling agency just sees her as like, wow, and then recruits her. And so then she's just all of a sudden she's a model from a very young age, and then from there gets into some of these movies with, I know that you've talked about The Witch on your show before, Jay, so we don't have to retread that, but the whole thing there is that it's a satanic initiation movie. Like the witch in the title refers to both the elderly witch in the woods, but also specifically to Thomas and Anya Taylor Joy, main character. Like the whole movie is her becoming the witch, her just kind of femininity getting freed from this repressive religious structure. Everyone else dies, she's the only one alive. We'll see this pattern kind of come up other times, and so that's kind of where she gets her start. This movie that very pointedly ends with this kind of very intense display of witchcraft ritualism. And then from there, just like really early on in her career, she only does a couple music videos ever, but the Skrillex music video that she's in is quite terrifying, very demonic in its imagery. So you just have that pattern of just upper crust British society, fashion industry, then all of a sudden just like this really terrifying set of imagery in like the first visual media in terms of music videos and film that she's in. So again, we can't know exactly what's going on there, but it is all a very interesting set of connections. And Brett, do you want to comment then on the Milla Jovovich kind of comparison?
Yeah, and then I'll make a few comments about about that, and then we can, go into some of the movies. But so, when you watch a lot of these mind control films, these Monarch, films that use this like familiar symbology, which we've talked about so much with bird cages and porcelain dolls and puppets and butterflies and mind control themes and stuff, you find a similar set of people, working, and often the same. It's actors in a second, but you get actresses too. It's the same ones that show up in these sort of movies, and Milla Jovovich, is one of them. And they often have this profile where they come from the modeling world as child models. First of all, Jennifer Connelly, many other. Now, it was Storm Management. It was the founder of Storm Management who discovered Anya, and you'll find other people who show up in these Monarch films coming out of like Storm Management Agency, including Jane March. Because I'm mentioning Bruce Willis, I'm doing this Monarch movie, Color of Night. And Jane March, the lead there, was also discovered. And she's a victim of trauma, and she's dissociated, and it's just a total mind control, film. So yeah, I mean, it's a pattern. And also, so Bruce Willis, I think about, because you're mentioning music, and what are this weird sort of revolving door between the modeling, movies, and the music industry you throw. Like, well, Bruce Willis, who like supposedly he beat out 3,000 other actors to get on this dramedy called Moonlighting in the 80s, and he just took off like overnight after that, and he even had a record, and even an HBO special mockumentary by the record. And it's like one of the biggest record producers. I can't remember his name. Like,
so I think
the same pattern you see with Anya Taylor Joy, with this sort of conveyor belt between the modeling industry and Hollywood. Often people with very interesting connected backgrounds in one way through high finance, the entertainment, the show thing. So there's Thomas has coined this term IMSA, Illuminati mind slave artists, which we don't mean literally, but anyway, there's a series of like IMSAs. There's a series of these actresses that you see just recurrently in a lot of these movies that have the mind control, Monarch, MK themes that they're just saturated with them. And you find, so Milla Jovovich being one of them, and she too came from the fashion industry at an early age. I think her mother was like the housekeeper for some producer. Yep, and she's just, and there's another pattern that they're often very sexualized at a very young age, publicly speaking. I mean, Drew Barrymore is an example of one of these that I've seen. So in the case of Milla, I'm sorry, we got cut off, so I'm trying to recall something. So Storm, I wanted to mention Storm Modeling Agency. So it was Storm Modeling Agency, and I don't need to mention any more names. You can just look this up. But the same person who founded Storm is the one who says that she discovered Anya Taylor Joy, if you can believe that, in front of a department store walking her dog. I mean, I guess you get lucky when you're, she was on stage. There's another story that she told, on Jimmy Kimmel or something, being on stage singing with some group at a young age. I mean, things were just really, they were coming up roses.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm super hot, and I'm a super hot diva, and I've been out walking on streets quite a bit, and I'm like, hello, discover me, right? And it's never happened. So there's something fishy about this, right? It couldn't have anything to do with like connections, right?
No.
And then I just made one more note. So that same woman discovered Jane March, who is an actor, one of these actors who fits the profile that came from Storm Modeling at a young age, young model, then goes into, she's very sexualized, and then goes into movies. And she's in a movie I'm looking at for the Monarch series that Thomas mentioned called Color of Night. And I mean, and Bruce Willis is in that too. I mean, there's, I think, males who fit this profile too.
Yeah,
we're not making any specific claims, by the way, about them. I'm just saying they is a pattern. They show, the same people will show up in these movies, and they have a certain background. And what's interesting about Willis is, like, he went from a nobody basically to overnight stardom because he beat out 3,000 other people supposedly to get the starring role in the show Moonlighting opposite Sybil Shepherd, this dramedy from the 80s. And he does, like, a year or two later, a couple.
Oh, my mom loved that show. I grew up watching Moonlighting.
My mom loved it too. We're about the same age. So it's like our moms. Yeah, I love that show. But anyway, right after he gets this gig on Moonlighting, he gets a record deal. And by the way, I mean, Bruce, I think he only has one record. It's the only one.
Under the boardwalk, yeah, down by the sea. Yes.
And it was a gigantic
Agent Man. Don't forget, Secret Agent Man is on Return of Bruno, which, by the way, Return of Bruno did go gold. So he actually did sell 500,000, which is odd because a lot of times the actor singing crossover doesn't go too well. But Bruce did okay with that. But you're right, and he does sing the song "Secret Agent Man."
Yeah, and he was hooked up with a top Hollywood or top music industry producer, someone from Atlantic or something. And then there was also an HBO mockumentary that was made to like have Bruce going back and being like at Woodstock and different things, which has, I don't know, I haven't seen it, but there just smells like kind of a cultural engineering angle to that. But all of this like happens to him sort of instantly, and then he does Die Hard. So you look at the origins of some of these people, you wonder maybe they're not as lucky as it looks. Like maybe they had some inside track to this.
There was that story that with Bruce, right? That he was just bartending, and then some producer or somebody, hey, walked into the bar. You're the next thing, right? This is a common refrain that we hear all the time. And I mean, I guess it's possible, but like you guys said, I mean, I'm kind of skeptical of this, right? Like everybody's just walking down the street, right? And I mean, this is a story with Harrison Ford too, right? Oh, he's like doing carpentry on the set, and then the producer says, you're the next star, right? So it kind of feeds into the narrative that like, the American dream, you're just like one day, somebody sees you and then you're, A-list, right?
Yeah, and with material like in these Anya Taylor Joy films, I think that myth, that official story of these coincidences of normal people getting discovered and getting to be the biggest star ever, it's dangerous because it makes it a lot easier for audience members to project themselves into these figures. Like if we just think of them as people who are part of a very synthetic part of culture that is attached to some very, very things that we would all agree are very dangerous, it would break the spell a little bit. But if it's she or he could be actually me, or wow, they're so amazing because it was their pure raw talent. And again, some of these people are talented actors and actresses or whatever, but that's obviously not the only thing going on there. So I think the way that these origin stories cover up the synthetic nature of at least part of culture also feeds into, I would say, some of the more negative psychological and spiritual dynamics of Hollywood and entertainment industry myth making and star making.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is there anything else that comes up maybe in hers or anybody else's background that's a little odd or, suggests? Because a lot of times, like with intelligence agencies, they'll even note that it's a family affair. Right. A lot of this stuff has a family situation to it, where sort of the next generation, the father or mother who's involved in spycraft will look, to recruit even amongst their children. It's a very common refrain in the history of espionage. So this may sound outlandish to people, but it's not actually that outlandish if you know the history of this kind of stuff.
Right, and with things seeming outlandish or actually much more reasonable, like one thing that I want to emphasize when we go over this Anya Taylor Joy material is that her own explanation for why her roles are so consistent is very thin in itself. Like in some ways, yeah, the burden of proof is on us as researchers into cultural engineering to like really rigorously demonstrate these patterns. But just from, I think, just an honest basic glance at these kind of movies that she's in over and over and over again, just in very short spaces of time, and these music videos, like in one of the, like I went through a lot of these pictures of her as a model doing the triangle or the eye cover over and over and over again. And one of them from 2016, so this is really early on in her career, they ask her as an interview attached to this photo shoot, just like, oh, why are you already kind of this horror movie actress? And this is before the pattern is like really established, where it's just like psychic fragmentation and like everything she does. But even then they ask her about it. She's like, oh, it's because I like stories about real people. Life isn't all black and white. It's about living in the gray. Just like all this really superficial stuff that I think, like, even if someone has no context for cultural engineering studies, if they were to just think about like, this person is like in movies about schizophrenia and trauma and mind control, like a lot. Does saying that it's because she likes stories about real people, is that actually a convincing explanation? I don't think it is.
Yeah, real people that are like totally dissociated and living. I know it's very true.
There's just no accounting for the specificity.
Oh yeah, one thing that's I noticed in her bio when I was reading through her bio, she claims that a big inspiration for her, a lot of artistic motivation, is these various traumas that she went through. And again, not knocking, maybe she did go through, but the things that she says, oh, I was had to move when I was a kid, and this traumatized me. And then she says, oh, I was bullied, and I got that traumatized me. But I mean, maybe, and again, maybe it's really extreme versions of bullying and breaking with people. I mean, there can be extreme versions of that, but I mean, I understand. So okay, trauma, but moving and getting made fun of aren't really traumas. I mean, every kid gets made fun of. I mean, that's part of maturing and becoming an adult. So maybe the trauma is something else that was a real trauma. I don't know.
Right. And just one thing that I would suggest to people is that they think about which direction the metaphor is going when we see in music videos and in films in particular, this intensely specific ritual image, the same symbolism over and over again, the allusions to mind control, the allusions to the occult, all these things. And then the artist involved saying, oh, it's about it's about sometimes it's hard to be a person, or I get sad sometimes. It's like very normal, mundane struggles. And then the idea there is apparently it's just reflexive for everyone in the entertainment industry forever to go to these exact same metaphors and symbols and visual representations of psychic fragmentation and schizophrenia and trauma and all these things to talk about very mundane human experiences. Is it sometimes you have to wonder then is it maybe it actually about the occult based mind control and not going in the direction of, oh, that's a metaphor for these other things.
Yeah, I think it's important to add, and we'll go to you, Brett, that it's not just dissociation and trauma. There is also the occult initiation theme, which is in multiple ones of her films as well. So obviously the witch, as you guys mentioned, which to summarize, we're not going to analyze that today, but for those who haven't seen it, this was early on. I remember watching this when it came out, 2015, somewhere in there. And that's a Robert Eggers film where she is basically part of a Puritan, super Calvinistic, crazy family that drives her to this other extreme of rebellion. And the rebellion there manifests as her basically making a pact or a covenant with Black Phillip, this goat character that's the devil. And it ends with her going off into the woods and doing this sort of naked, sky clad, floating ritual or something, whatever they're doing out there as witches do. And so, again, Northman, she's the witch in the Northman. She has the ability to utilize mushrooms and potions to do psyops on the other Viking tribes that capture them. So, I mean, she's consistently doing these sort of initiatic occult witch elements as well as the dissociation themes too. So both of these typically run together. And I'd forgotten how in last night in Soho, there's also this theme of constantly sort of seeing dead people. So it is the dissociation alter theme, the doubling and all that. But then like the main girl who's in present day, she's seeing dead people, spirits, it's the demonic. So anyway, that's just an element we want to keep in mind too. It's not just dissociation, it's also that, but maybe not so much in Morgan. There's not really a satanic element other than like the nanotech stuff, which we'll get to here in a minute. But Brett, did you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm thinking about a lot of the films that we're going to be talking about when you mentioned in Last Night in Soho, the visions of dead people, and how this does come up in a lot of these mind control films. And there's a lot of course, a lot of these films are horror films, but this is in Marrowbone, which we're going to talk a little bit about too. I mean, it seems there it's pretty obvious that it's some kind of it represents like repressed trauma returning, and that's how they use the goat. There's just a lot of a lot of this like ritual Illuminati satanic stuff being done through the horror genre. You mentioned all the occult element to all of this, which is really heavy in Last Night in Soho. Well, one of the big ideas of the show is that film is a ritual, and so they're performing rituals in these films. The witch, obviously, which you mentioned again, they're performing a ritual, satanic ritual, these very specific satanic rituals, or they just love to keep filming this and showing it to you. And I mean, I guess just one more point before we just get into the films in like more granular detail. Yeah, a lot of these movies, these Monarch type of movies, where with these imps appearing as sort of puppets of the industry. And so it's like, this is revelation of the method, because the film is partly meant to glorify the industry while showing you its horrors and like getting you to basically think the trauma is really good, and it makes you into this Ubermensch sort of figure. And that's a theme too. They often become, with Milla Jovovich becoming the sort of female Ubermensch, the perfect being, Anya Taylor Joy. So they're glorifying trauma, and that's like, to me, that's the core of the Monarch film. Like, that's what it's getting at. We can talk about all the different symbols, weird Illuminati stuff, but it's valorizing and fetishizing this traumatized state. Crazy. That's what they're selling us, craziness. Like, they're literally trafficking craziness. Hollywood's trying to make us
a similar theme in Neon Demon, where when she ends up, spoiler alert, basically exploited, abused, and then murdered and eaten. Of course, he's trying to display the fact that, it's a predatory, industry, but it's also, in other interviews, he said, well, my films are all just nihilistic. So he's explicitly saying, it's nihilistic and predatory. So there's nothing wrong with predatory nihilism. It's just the nature of the natural world, according to him, right? When he was explaining Neon Demon. And that's all about the modeling world as well. And so, even again, like you said, these films are actually saying, we exploit people, we eat people. It's cannibalistic, and maybe even literally cannibalistic, because if you remember, the Jenna Malone character is a witch, right? Jenna Malone and her other two witches are engaged in actual witchcraft when I won't say what they do. It's pretty nasty, but and then it ends with, of course, cannibalism themes. I do have a question to ask you guys, because just for the sake of relevance, and if people want more of a detailed deep dive, they can go to you guys' podcast. It's great. I listen to it on the regular, and I know you guys did cover New Mutants, so that's the one film of hers I've not seen. So is there what is in New Mutants that fits into our theme today?
Yeah, so I did a Monarch episode on New Mutants. It's just over the top Monarch. So it's about these teenagers with, this is another Monarch motif, the superpowered child that's being, housed by the government to control the fire starter with Drew Barrymore. And so we got that going on in spades. It's just, they're teenagers, and they're all, they have these superpowers. They've all just suffered some trauma. They don't know what's happened. It's interrupted their memory, and they're all in this place where they think they're being trained to be X-Men. But spoiler alert for everything, sorry, but they're basically being trained. They're not, this isn't Delta. It's interesting because it's not Delta programming, it's Alpha programming. And they have visions of they're going to be sent to this Delta facility where they're deliberately traumatized. And it's got all, so it's got, and it's got revelation of the method in terms of how they're being taught like permissiveness and power and thinking it's liberation, but it's actually control. It's just got all of that kind of material in it. So, and again, Anya Taylor Joy's character in particular is like traumatized in ways we shouldn't even describe on here. It's just horrible. Like it's just, it's all about this really dark fetishization of trauma through the superhero genre. Now,
okay, that's what I figured, but I wasn't sure because I hadn't seen it yet, and I heard you guys talking about it, so I just wanted to kind of get a little overview of that. I appreciate that, and this makes me think of. So this is basically like, it's a Nietzschean, neo-Darwinian attitude that we find in people like Jonas Salk, Bertrand Russell, Jose Delgado, some of these, actual MKUltra doctor people, not saying that Bertrand Russell was, but Delgado was, this is mentioned in Lily. They see themselves as scientists who can exert external pressures and stimuli that will cause the evolutionary model to move at a quicker pace. And they actually think that these stressors, not just environmental stressors with like toxins and all that, but they actually talk about genetic stressors, genetic experiments, especially Salk, that they think, because they're the priests of science, right, that they can like bump evolution like further in, Stephen Jay Gould's like punctuated equilibrium sense. I know that's like 10,000 years, but they think they can speed it up by really putting the toxic pressures on the society in all aspects. That's how crazy it is. Like their justification is, if we toxify everything and we traumatize everybody, we're going to get like the next phase of human evolution. We'll all be X-Men, dude.
Yeah, and I think then we can connect New Mutants to another couple of the films that she's been in, which are Split and Glass. these M. Night Shyamalan movies, and we talked about Bruce Willis briefly. I mean, he's in Glass. He's at the very end of Split, when it turns out that the twist for that Shyamalan movie is, oh, this is a stealth sequel to Unbreakable, and then all three of the posters of those movies have like the shattered glass over the character's face, so that just the giveaway right there that there's these kind of psychic fragmentation, mind control themes going on. But yeah, you have the connection from these really niche Monarch themed to more horror films that are so explicitly fetishizing the mind of the mind control victim to the most popular genre on the face of the planet, the face of pop culture, which is it's superheroes, right? And that's one thing that I've really carried over from my old worldview of how I used to interpret all this to how I do now as an Orthodox Christian, is that there is a secret superhumanism as the religion of pop culture. It is very, very consistent. And Jay, you were talking about how it's not just trauma and dissociation. There's these occult initiation themes in there as well. But we can see the superhumanism as a kind of bridge between these things, because in the what we might speculate as the higher levels of the Monarch kind of mind control programming, as well as in as in the occult stuff, there's all the idea of breaking down the human to create a new human, and that's exactly what the X-Men franchise is, which gains a lot of steam, is written during the counterculture. So there's a lot of crossover culturally of those kind of influences. And speaking just metaphorically, but I think something that I said as my addendum to Brett's Monarch New Mutants episode is that X-Men is to Monarch as a superheroes in general are to MK Ultra, this much more specific fetishization of the mind control subject's fractured psyche, with this all these explicit connections of developing sexuality in teenagers to their developing of superpowers, of all these things. There's the whole Dark Phoenix storyline, which has been adapted a couple times in the movies, and in the comics makes some explicit references to like Eastern mysticism and the Kabbalah and all that. So that's all just really, really upfront, the basically breaking down of the human, whether in like a scientific laboratory MK sense or in terms of occult initiatory senses, to let in the fantasies and to let in the dissociative fantasies, of which the superhero mythos is a very clear version of. And I would say like the ultimate implication of these things has to do with demonic possession, and that comes out very explicitly in some of the occult literature on these subjects, and then also the connection of the idea of the divine child. That's a very Crowleyan idea and comes up a lot in post-Crowleyan occultism. The star child, the moon child, all of these things. And then with something like New Mutants, you see that as we've just sold the entire culture has been sold on the idea of, oh, if you get traumatized as a teenager, you get to be Spider-Man or whatever. And so it's this combination of trauma-based programming with this esoteric view of evolution, this idea that we're gaining magical powers through this Darwinian mechanism, which is at the heart of the X-Men franchise. So the fact that Anya Taylor Joy was in New Mutants, and then also in the same few years was in Split and in Glass. And I can talk a little bit more about Glass, because the existence of that movie just drives me just crazy, just how upfront it is with these ideas of basically creating a new human by unleashing the idea of superhuman ideology. As soon as we find out about these things, and everyone's going to start becoming superheroes, and it doesn't matter that the James McAvoy character or the Sam Jackson character killed all these people, because the important thing is that we become superhumans. And Taylor Joy is more of a minor role in there, but she's still there and still contributing to these themes. So I can go more about those movies at some point during this discussion if you want, but those are some of the connections that I made. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just a couple points, a little side chain to remind everybody. And one reason I want to do that is over the years, but why haven't you talked about X-Men First Class is just because I've forgotten. But it would be good to bring in at this point that, so in X-Men First Class, you have this going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And at that point, Professor X is setting up this, school for the gifted. And in reality, it's a CIA operation, because we find out that the people that are behind this plot, it's the CIA who's picking the kids, sending them to this program to be kind of under the tutelage of Professor X. And then we find out that Michael Fassbender as young Magneto is coming out of the concentration camps, and he's mad at his family being put to death through eugenics. And then in a weird twist, he becomes a eugenicist. And so Magneto is explicitly listed as somebody who, although Jewish, is a eugenicist who wants to depopulate the lesser evolved non-mutant people. And so the whole Cuban Missile Crisis is about the good X-Men, James McAvoy and others, right? Jennifer Lawrence and all these people. She ends up being a bad guy versus the, so the good CIA versus the bad deep state, basically, is what X-Men First Class ends up being about. And then that ties in perfectly with what you guys are saying about the other X-Men themes. The other point I want to make was, or the New Mutant, don't forget Doctor Strange, which in the Marvel universe, beyond even the realm of the storyline of the X-Men, the real sort of mastermind within the Marvel universe is Doctor Strange. And so he's the one that sees into the multiverse, that stops Thanos and all this kind of stuff, because he picks a different reality. And the whole story of Doctor Strange is that he's able to do this because he specifically learns all of the Eastern initiatory rites and becomes a master of ritual magic. And so he's pretty explicitly, I did multiple podcasts on this back at the time and did a really in-depth analysis with Clyde Lewis on his Ground Zero on the Doctor Strange stories. He is basically a Crowley figure as well. So he's positioned as that. And I remember going to comic book stuff years ago with, I have a friend who's a comic book artist. He drew all the Game of Thrones stuff. And we would go to the conventions back in like the 90s and the 2000s, because he was trying to get signed as an artist and show his materials. And you would see even in the mid 2000s, they were promoting ritual magic at the comic conventions. Like they were giving out flyers to come to like after shows and learn, right? That this is when Grant Morrison first started doing public speeches at conventions and talking about chaos magic and how powerful it was and all this stuff. So that was really becoming sort of underground in the mid 2000s in the comic book world. And it was all totally Crowleyan, right? It was like 100% openly Crowleyan stuff. And so for us, you and me and you guys, to nowadays be talking about, 10, 15 years later, that comic books and Marvel are Crowleyan, it's like this has been in comic books forever. I mean, just think about the most popular comic books are what's his face, the ritual magic, V for Vendetta guy. I just went blank.
Alan Moore, yeah.
Alan Moore, right? Who's open Crowley, open ritual magic guy. He talks about how I couldn't get any further in me art until I did Crowley, and then I could go to the next level, really. So he starts talking about how the initiation took him to the next level for his art. Right. And then I'll hand it back over to you guys. So I don't want to dwell too long on the other. I know we want to get into these. I don't want to keep you guys too long, but I did want to throw in a look at the big brains on Brett. You mentioned Samuel L. Jackson, so I had to throw in a Samuel L. Jackson reference. But okay, so where do you guys want to go next? You want to go into? You want to start with the videos real quick, like Brett? I don't want to cut you off. If there's anything you wanted to add before we go into the video,
I got it. Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
Right.
Look at the big brains on Brett.
I remember. Brett gets killed.
Yeah. No offense. That's not a secret revelation of the method code that you're gonna get. You're not gonna get killed by Mr. Water.
Yeah, so like I think the music videos would be a good place to start, especially because the Hozier one has so many connections to the menu. Just a couple really quick notes. First, I actually just the other day recorded a bonus episode on the Doctor Strange movies. That'll be on our Patreon, so we'll be covering those as well. Cool. With the Magneto kind of themes and the X-Men stuff, like it's the constant like good elites versus bad elites, good superhumans versus bad superhumans, smokescreen. But then also explicitly a few years ago in the X-Men comic books, there was a huge reboot where it's just like, okay, all the mutants are on the same team now. Professor X and Magneto and everyone, they're just united as a race. Magneto is telling the humans, you have new gods now, all that stuff. I haven't kept up with the comics.
It's not good and evil, right? It's like good guys become bad guys become good guys. It's all relativized in the Marvel universe.
But then specifically the idea that the most important thing about mutants is their superhuman abilities, not whether they're good or evil. That's been the subtext of this franchise for a long time. The idea that, maybe Magneto was right. Like they just came out and basically said that. So that's not even speculative. Like that's in there.
You're saying that the mutants all teamed up against the humans.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I can send you some stuff on that. The whole reboot that happened a few years ago. It's pretty crazy, and there's very heavy reference to like tarot and other occult stuff within this kind of reboot that they did. It's very on the nose. It's really interesting, but and also just because you mentioned the Witch and Northman for the Robert Eggers Edgar movie, the other movie in between those, Lighthouse. Apparently, Taylor Joy asked to be the mermaid in that movie because there's like kind of like, and she got turned down by the director for whatever reason, but she was almost, or she wanted to be the mermaid figure that drives the protagonist insane in that movie.
Right. So, yeah, we did cover that. That was a wild movie, but
yeah, it's pretty crazy. But so you want to get into the music video? So
yeah, let's start with the Hozier one. I got a few notes on that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So this one mostly, so when I saw that, okay, she's been in 2 music videos, I didn't know, I didn't know like what they would be like based on the kind of movies that she's been in. Then my jaw like hit the floor really hard when I watched them, just because of just like how intense. It's the exact same themes as in all of her movies, basically. So like with the Dinner and Diatribes, I think is the name of the Hozier song that she's in. There's, and so spoiler alerts, of course, everything we're talking about, including the menu, but this very similar imagery of, all right, fancy dinner, ritual stuff going on. The dinner is being headed by some kind of like psychopathic, like dark figure, like Hozier himself, who has like black teeth and all that in the music video. Kind of some parallels with like the chef, like Ralph Fiennes' character in the menu. But then marshmallows in particular, like he's set on fire. She's like roasting marshmallows over him, and I think maybe vice versa at one point. But like the marshmallow imagery there is like very similar to the s'mores human sacrifice ritual at the end of the menu that we'll get into. But just throughout the entire video, and she's trying to escape, and like he's controlling her with his mind, so she's like being pulled back to the table. Specific like spinning imagery, which is a huge Monarch tip off. And then she's like flicking matches at him and eventually like lights him on fire, and he's just sitting there. He's very obviously kind of coded as Satan in there, just in terms of his dress and affect and everything. It's obviously like hellfire all around him. And then the video ends with one of the waiters or servants or whatever they're supposed to be, like flicks a lit match at her, and she looks down. So we don't see it, but we know she's about to be consumed as well. But the whole thing is very disturbing. Just like constantly she's like getting up, trying to run away, and different things stop her. She just can't get out. So pretty obvious creepy stuff there.
Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, Thomas said it, but the spirit cooking sort of stuff is obvious. And we're talking about well, I mean, at a minimum, like we're talking about these weird high art ritual dinners where people or models or something are made to look like food, or food's made to look like people, and these like hyper elites get together and get involved in this. And a lot of people in the entertainment industry are into it, and Marina Abramovich being, I mean, your audience will be familiar with all of this, but yeah. So anyway, the spirit cooking motif just comes up repeatedly. And that one of the, by the way, if I can just mention, like in passing, like one of the most like total revelation of the method or total hangout versions of that is in actually Nightmare on Elm Street 5, where the character who wants to be a model, they're talking about Ford, her being a Ford model, by the way. That's another one of the huge modeling agencies, Ford Model Agency. But when they're talking about that, then Freddy kills her by like, it's like a spirit cooking scene where she's like forced to consume herself, and even the eyeball stuff and everything. So yeah, so people, yeah, so that kind of language, especially in the kind of spirit cooking register, is really strongly emphasized, it seems like, in Anya Taylor Joy's work. And then it kind of peaks with the menu, which is, I just think, reflects just sort of marries, several obsessions that the elite, have. That this obsession with initiation, I think, is pretty clear too. Just
absolutely. Yeah, my notes I wrote down, and Jamie had a good point too, which is that in some of the other Hozier songs, particularly I think that one that was like a big radio hit, where he talks about worshiping at the temple of her body and all this, which is very Crowley and very sex magic. So she was making the point that he seems to have a very kind of Crowley type of OTO style view of sex magic, which we know that's very popular in the whole music industry world. And food is interesting on multiple levels, as you guys know, because in the modern world, we just think of it as a a necessary ritual a necessary process to get energy, when in the ancient and medieval world, food is a religious covenantal thing. And especially in scripture, food is covenantal because you're not just eating the meal, for example, in the Old Testament sacrifices with the priest, you're eating the meal with God. Likewise, the pagans had the idea that the meal was something you were also covenanting or making a pact with the gods that you are eating, or think of putting the food on the grave, or putting the food out the idol. Paul talks about to give food to idols or whatever. So food is a religious ritual, and a lot of the symbolism of a lot of these esoteric and occult music videos and films and whatnot, particularly the menu here. And I had not seen this video until Thomas, you had mentioned it, so I went and watched it, and I was kind of surprised, like, oh, this is like the menu, right? It's like very similar themes to the movie. And so yeah, you've got basically this goth sort of vampire goth dinner. The food looks really gross. It's very red, and it looks like blood, like a bowl of blood, basically. So she's trapped. She tries to get out of this elite dinner. She's been invited to sit at the table of the elite, right? And I think you're right about that. He's sort of a devil character. She can't get away. She tries to multiple times to get out, and so she decides, well, screw you, I'm going to fight. But she ends up, like you said, catching him on fire. She's caught on fire, and so this being burnt up, this comes up. This was at the end of Last Night in Soho, right? Being basically immolated. And immolation is also a form of sacrifice and sacrificial offer. It's the burnt offering in the book of Leviticus as well. So remember that all of those religious immolation and or offering or blood sacrifice, they're all similar to Old Testament Levitical rites and rituals. And I think that's kind of the underlying theme, not just there, but also in the menu, because in the menu, keep in mind, it's not just, as you guys know, this is for the audience, like there's multiple things going on. So it might not be purely about occult ritual and occult initiation, or it can also be a commentary on that the elite are predatory, and they do feed on those underneath them, and they view them in a purely predator prey way. That's oftentimes the theme in a lot of these elite movies, and that even if it's not literally meaning cannibalism, it can be about the predatory relationship between classes. That's very apparent in the menu, because the only reason, in part, that she ends up getting out, spoiler alert, is because Ray Fun recognizes that she comes from the socioeconomic class he comes from. And so she's let free because she has suffered trauma as an SEX worker, right? And so he used to have a crappy hamburger stand. He comes from the low class, but he's now at the elite society, ready to basically immolate them, right? And so he's adopted the elite attitude, and she just runs away, right? So yeah. So, and by the way, I'm not saying that cannibalism in films and videos is only symbolic. No, actually, some of these people are really into cannibalism. That's another element to this. So as weird as that may sound, I'm glad you guys mentioned the spirit cooking element, because yeah, that's a recent thing. Don't forget Katy Perry's Bon Appetit video, which actually came out 2 or 3 years before the whole spirit cooking thing with Marina Abramovich. So yeah. So anyway, so anything else on Hozier video?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the point about Hozier's just the kind of treatment of sensuality in his lyrics being kind of the Crowleyan. I think that that's important. I mean, the main line of that song is like something like "I'd suffer hell if you tell me what you do to me tonight," or something like that. Of course, his most famous song ever is "Take Me to Church," this like pro-gay, anti-religious anthem. And in the album cycle for which that music video was associated with, some really weird artwork all about drowning for Hozier of him. He was actually just like submerged and like on this chair underwater, that there was a photo taken of, that there was like artwork then drawn of it. There was this whole thing I watched that was interesting about that background. So I don't know a ton about the guy, but a bunch of weird stuff. There. And with what you mentioned about the menu just now, just makes me think the patterns in Taylor Joy's work are just so incredibly consistent, because there's both the fact that there's the marshmallow kind of ritualism with the spirit cooking illusions a few years before the menu comes out, but then also basically the way that the Fiennes character like decides to spare her. It's very, very similar to the end of Split, where the superhuman, who's superhuman because of his trauma and has literally evolved all these new capabilities, well, just kind of like in The Witch, where it's like everyone else has died, she gets selected by Satan, by Black Phillip. Then later in the menu, everyone else dies, but the chef says that she can go because he recognizes their kinship. It's exactly what happens in Split when the James McAvoy Beast character, he's killed her friend.
The Beast, the Black Phillip is a beast.
Yes.
Right. And recognizing because she was, we'll use the code word that all the people on YouTube use, abuse. That's what we learn about her in Split. And that's when he sees that about her, then he lets her go.
Right. He has he has these lines about rejoice, for those who are broken are the more evolved. It's but just the very similar dynamic of as with Fiennes, as with McAvoy. It's like, you're one of us. You get to live. You are part of the superclass. It's basically identical.
But it's weird because both of them are not from the superclass.
Right.
So they're like the servants of the superclass, because remember, she shows up at the elite dinner in the menu with this goofy dude who's hired her for the night as an SEX worker.
Well, sure. Oh, go ahead, Brett.
I would say I think it's important too to emphasize in this movie too. She has multiple identities. So at first she's said to be Margot from Nebraska, and I think there's a slightly coded reference to Wizard of Oz and the ingenue for Middle America stumbling into kind of the dark castle of the elites. But then she turns out to be this like high-end escort who's from, and so she from a mess, and she's pretending, and she survives. It's making things of Morgan too, because they're glorifying the sort of psychopath and his emotionlessness. You also have sort of like the autist and the psychopath are like the two preferred subjectivities. Exactly. It seems like, but so in this movie, she's able to fool him, I think, basically, because he's wrong about her. He thinks, well, you're from my class. You're not really hungry. You're one of the people being consumed. But he's wrong. She is hungry. And so she's the new super class. And I thought the movie, and so if you look at anything about this movie, they're going to tell you it's some kind of critique of this. Wrong. It's reproducing maybe the super class is critiquing themselves, that they're not ruthless enough, or that they become too decadent or whatever. But this is not a movie that's seriously subversive in any way. It's really just their worldview. That's
I agree with that.
And you have to have a certain amount of like elasticity, like even in the Western Middle Ages, the feudal times, there had to be some social mobility, or you do go totally decadent. Maybe there's a recognition that they're decadent and all of that. But anyway, that's how I read the ending. We can kind of work backwards from there.
Yeah, that's a good point. But so before we go to the menu, let's do the last video real quick. The Grand Theft Auto Red Lips video for Skrillex, which was I think 2016 as well. And because Jamie and I just watched J-Lo's The Cell, we immediately noticed the obvious sort of visual cinematography parallels to The Cell, particularly when it starts out with her in this sort of desert field and she's all sort of I don't know what she's supposed to look like there, but she's this sort of out of place feminine thing, and then she looks like she's made out of clay. And then in the second sequence, when she's dancing with the powdered donut zombies, she is suddenly seen placed in an enclosure, and it looks just like the artwork in The Cell when the serial killer would imprison the women in his mind in their cells like a piece of artwork. And he calls them in the movie his dolls, right? So she's imprisoned there. The demons seem to be chasing her to imprison her and make her into this sort of cell-like doll in a cell. And it's reminiscent of a lot of pop art, a lot of Damien Hirst art, a lot of that very degenerate, openly demonic high art, right? Where it's like, oh, here's a chopped up horse, isn't it beautiful? Here's a crucifix, submerged in urine. It's edgy, it's beautiful. See, and all of that is by these people is 100% intended to be pure satanic inversion.
Right. And when I was reading some interviews with Skrillex and with Grant Singer, the director of the video, and he's also done stuff with The Weeknd, Taylor Swift, Travis Scott, others. And they reference The Cell. They reference some of the movies that they talk about as cues for the video. So The Cell, The Shining, Neverending Story. And Skrillex is an interesting figure on his own. I think that his parents were both Scientologists, and he's in terms of his own like musical interests, like it's like The Doors, Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson. So you can see a lot of these streams of ideological influence there. But then Skrillex also says, "Oh, I wanted the video to be nightmarish, schizophrenic, all of these things." And one of the more striking shots is when she goes into that enclosure when she's fleeing the demons, and she has this vision in this mirror of she's kind of more doll-like, almost more princess-like at the beginning, and then she sees this like lifeless vision of this pale version of herself dressed in black, suspended by chains. I mean, it's very like basically it's like she's seeing the reality of her actual state of just like total imprisonment. Yes. And then the last shot of the video is really chilling, where you just see she's running, she's in the desert, she falls to her knees, and then you just see as like the black bars on the top and the bottom close into the shot to nothingness. They're catching up with her. The demons are getting her. So the fact that her only music videos ever are that and the Hozier one, I mean, this really, really starts to defy coincidence.
Absolutely. Brad, do you want to say anything on that one?
No, we can talk about the menu if you want.
Yeah, let's move on to the menu. Sorry we took so long to get to that. I know we had a lot of connections. Oh yeah, did want to mention that we do have in the Red Lips video before this was. I mean, I don't follow this horrendous fashion world, so I don't really know what's going on in that world, but we did notice a lot of the demon figures that sort of appear as spiders and these sort of powdered donut people. Like at the beginning, they are covered in very Balenciaga-esque sort of total face mask things, and then in the second sequence she's got this weird facial mask on that looks sort of very BDSM-y. And that, I think, was way ahead of its time in terms of what's being promoted in terms of the high fashion world pushing now the BDSM stuff, which is all just completely disgusting to me. But I mean, that's all the actual stuff is demonic. And now it's being pushed in the fashion world, as I was saying about how Zoolander is telling you that fashion is a cultural driver, because in Zoolander 2, for example, they're out of date. Like what they think is edgy and cool when they meet the Benedict Cumberbatch non-binary character, right? He makes fun of them as old and outdated, right? Because I am all, right? So he's beyond any predicates. He's beyond gender. He's beyond male, females, right? And Kyle Mooney has this joke that all has married her himself in a ritual. So this was, and if you remember, the Hansel character gets married to like 8 different people, and one of them is Kiefer Sutherland, who's pregnant with Hansel's baby. So that was 2016, satirizing the things that are now supposedly normal, right, or being normalized. So you can't even do this. Even the satire of 2016 is now like not PC. That's how crazy things are. And these videos and this fashion world shows this pushing of this stuff. And real quick, one last thing, the Dior commercial, which I saw, you've got basically the owl imagery. You've got, it ends with a bunch of astrology, and then it's just a bunch of images. I don't know that there's a consistent theme to it, but it ends with owls and astrology, and then it has Shirley Bassey singing the song. I'm pretty sure it's her, which she's known, of course, for singing Goldfinger, the Goldfinger song for the Bond theme. And the Bond stuff will pop up again in Last Night in Soho, because when she goes back to the 60s, the first thing we see is the Thunderball banner for Thunderball playing in the theater. So anyway, that's my last thought. Oh, the black goo. There was a sequence of there's a bowl of black goo in the Red Lips video, and then it turns into these moths, right? So I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but moths, I think, can be connected to the Monarch, sort of, because they're very, very similar to, because it's a transformation of a moth, but it's not a moth in a cocoon, because it's black goo, right? Which again is its own kind of Hollywood mythology and a bunch of sci-fi films, which has a lot of significances to the demonic and to initiation, to Luciferianism, to aliens, to, it has a lot of meanings that we could go into. But anything else on the Dior commercial, and then we'll jump right into the menu.
I think you covered it. Yeah.
Okay. So, Brad, I'll let you take over on the menu, since we kind of talked about the end of it. You want to go back to anything in the beginning? I really liked your point there about how And which, by the way, I did not think that the movie was anything really subversive, because a lot of times we get this idea that when movies present class warfare, oh yeah, it's against the system, dude. But most of the time it's not, because number one, Marxism has always been a tool of very wealthy elites, and number two, usually in these stories where it's class warfare, the character who ends up winning out is the one that's more ruthless than everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these movies too function as like power trips for the powerless. I think it's to drain at a collective level to sort of drain off energy that could be productively spent, in some other way. Zoolander is a good bridge into this, because Zoolander, which is just like explicitly about like Illuminati, MK government, mind control in the fashion industry, and a comedy, making a comedy out of it. Will Ferrell, right, is produced this movie, The Menu, and of course he appears in The Menu. I don't know. So producer, Adam McKay is produced it with Ferrell, sort of that team. They work together on a lot of comedy stuff. McKay's background is interesting. He just made this recent movie. What is it? Don't Look Up. This like climate change propaganda, anti-human, with all this like who's who of celebrity politicians. But he also, interestingly, he's sort of weighing in on in conspiracy world. He's done a podcast series on the Epstein case. He made this did he produce it? He was involved in the production of this HBO series, Q, Into the Storm, which I didn't watch it, but I was looking it up, and it's kind of gotten some criticism from the normie press. It looks like it's gotten some sort of pious criticism because it's like just being too nice to these crazy we can't the language is something like they don't understand. You can look up the page, very interesting, like he violated the norm. Like, I didn't know there was a list of norms for talking about extremists now. An extremist is whatever you say is an extremist, so there's norms where we can tell you what to say all the time. But apparently he got criticized for that. But it looks to me, it's like a limited hangout, it's controlled opposition type of stuff, and it's kind of obvious in his case because he is sort of wired into the upper echelons. The guys who directed it, or the director and writers, are from The Onion, so they seem to have hooked up with Ferrell and McKay through the comedy scene. Oh, also one thing to mention, which is the rest of it with McKay, he was executive produced the show Motherland Fort Salem, which is about, I haven't seen it again, but it's about witches who are working with the U.S. military in some future world, and there's it's this world.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure and take use of the promo code for the show sponsor, for this channel sponsor, which is choq.com. That's CHOQ.com. And you can find the links in the description below the video. You get 50% off any of the great organic, actually better than organic supplements that they offer at choq.com. If you want to support my channel, the best way to do that is to head on over there and use that promo code J50, that's J50, to get 50% off. You can also use the recurring subscription of J53 Life, that's J53LIFE, if you want to sign up for automatic recurring subscriptions on those excellent supplements. Health is absolutely necessary in combating the toxic culture that we live in. I also would say, if you want to get access to my books, head on over to the shop at my website and get signed copies there. Thank you.
Theta program, right? Creating these, Stanford Research Institute, Psi warriors, men who stare at goats kind of stuff. Now explicitly crossbred with Satanism and the deep state stuff. So, themes of the menu. Again, I read it as an allegory partly. I'm not reducing it. But I'm reading the plot where they go to this island. What is your word for Jeffrey McEffrey?
Jeff Stein McEffrey.
Stein McEffrey. I'm trying to remember that island. Elites going to an island for a meal that's also an initiation to consume maybe people or something. There's that. So, and again, you think also that McKay is into that territory already. So it's like, I read it's an allegory for initiation at one level, a lead initiation. We already talked about the kind of spirit cooking stuff. The suicide cult theme is something we really need to dwell on a little bit. I mean, at one hand, I think they're the obsession with suicide cult. And by the way, Leo is supposed to be playing Jim Jones supposedly in an upcoming movie. So they're obsessed with suicide cults. They're obsessed with mass suicide.
That reminds me again. So, and I know you guys may or may not have had time to see this yet, but on a whim, Jamie and I, about a year ago, we started watching Servant, which is Shyamalan's Apple show. And Servant is all about food and cult. And so the cult in that, I'm trying to remember all the details because there's a lot of episodes, and I think we're 3 seasons into it. I think there's only been 3 seasons. We don't know what's going to come in terms of the 4th season, but long story short, it's basically a nanny who's from a cult, seems to have these powers, and she ends up being a nanny to this young girl, to this sort of uppity. I think they're in Philadelphia somewhere. They're an upper class couple. He's a celebrity chef, and she is a sorry, somebody's at the door. She's a TV news reporter. And we find out that there's more going on with the nanny's cult. And so, long story short, basically it's just that we don't exactly know where it's going because the series hasn't gone to an end, but there's something to do with food. Food is in every episode. His elite chef making of food stuff comes up. And then we've got this potentially suicide. It's a suicide death cult that she's fled from. So again, all the same themes, even though it's not Anya Taylor Joy in it, it's Shyamalan doing something very similar to what's in the menu.
Yeah, and so here also the ritual significance of food is explicitly, mentioned. We'll get into where he said they don't get bread. Remember, is that you guys are above the class of people who eat bread. You don't get bread. And I think all this points to, again, when you consider that this is obviously some kind of initiation or an allegory for an initiation, it's what Charles Upton calls it that counter initiation kind of idea. It's a flipping of what the proper initiation should be. So they're not gaining their souls or losing it, and they're not consuming, they're being consumed. So everything is and this is this obsession with inversion is obviously just runs through, especially you're talking about the Cell and the fashion industry and Hers, by the way. Yeah, it was a very good episode. Cell is a very strange, a haunting movie. I saw it in the theater. But you're talking about Hers. Like, I heard that at one point, like, the shark in a tank, or one of the things in a tank, like it was leaking or something, or those things had to get, they were just so expensive. They became like white elephants, to some people who bought them, which is, I guess, what they deserve. But anyway, Thomas, I know you were about to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would love to do a full series on Shyamalan at some point. We have a long list of directors we want to cover, but especially with the Unbreakable, Split, Glass trilogy. But there's a lot of his other movies that we can talk about these interesting themes for. So I'll be interested in looking at the food angle in that show you were mentioning at some point, Jay, just because, it's made so clear what the philosophy is around food in the menu, where I think the chef character, the Fiennes character, says about what happens inside this room is meaningless compared to what happens outside. We are but a frightened nanosecond, and nature is timeless. So it's the carnal nature, the act of eating food is a way to kind of dissolve the human into animality, into nature. This pagan idea of these eternal cycles, or things about like eating the ocean is brought up a lot. And when you look at everything from more progressive theologies to explicit occultism, the privileging of the oceanic over the solid and the stable, something that happens a lot there. And I think there's a lot of that is going into these clear post-human or even anti-human philosophies, theologies, and spiritualities. So you have that connotation throughout the way that food is treated, in the movie. And then I think, one thing that really struck me with the menu was I was trying to figure out the character dynamics going on, because the movie seems to have like a lot of contempt for everybody. It's like people are being disrespectful, but also like the Spurgy character who's a foodie is annoying too. And so then I realized, okay, so the movie likes the chef character and it likes the Anya Taylor Joy character. Like, she's the right indifference and he's the right passion for it. Whereas the guy that Taylor Joy is with, he's the wrong passion for it. And then everyone else is the wrong indifference. So they're Philistines. He's like a Spurg lord, but she and him, the chef, and Taylor Joy, the whole movie is about them finding some kind of understanding where, like, at the end, she calls him out for being boring and pretentious. He doesn't understand the love that he needs to put into it, but she does. And they've talked earlier about, you know, her as an escort and like understand it. And like he thinks she should understand him as a food service guy because of that. And honestly, the movie, it's not super clear on what the general grievance the chef character has is. Like, it's kind of scattershot. Like, it's a very confident movie and he monologues a lot, but I could never really find a clear through line for like what the motivation.
Yeah, and I'm just so going from my notes, and I don't know. I had the same kind of lack of clarity, but the first couple things I noticed was that when they get to when we're there in the island, we noticed that he speaks of everybody amongst the staff living as a family. He uses the word family. It's a self-sustaining island-based community, so we get cult vibes right away. The bells are rung, not just the dinner bell, but it also evokes liturgy. It evokes the sort of the bell that's rung at the mass or at the divine liturgy. So we know there's some sort of religious component to this, or pseudo-religious component. And he refers to things like food as memory, food as story. And he says that, I think he says, I don't know if he says this or just my note. He speaks of something about how food is telling a story. So presumably the foods that he's serving relate to his own story or his own issues with society. That's the story he's telling. Perhaps she decodes this because when she breaks into his office and she sees his pictures, right? She sees that he used to have a stupid burger stand and he felt like nobody appreciated the burgers, right, that he was making. And so now he has this vendetta, not just against, basically against everyone. And it's about the who. Well, I'll let you comment here because I'm not sure. I want to say that that's what it's about, but we'll go ahead with what you wanted to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I do think that some of what's going on there is like a passing of the torch of one view of the elite, you know, for another. That in some way he sacrifices himself and everyone else, but he respects her at the end. She calls him out for these for the pretentious and unconvincing nature of how he's doing some aspects of this ritual. She lets it happen, gets away, and then gets him to produce a crowd pleaser. So there's kind of, I think, an entertainment metaphor there as well, that he makes a cheeseburger and he talks about it's American cheese. It's the best cheese for these things.
Yeah, right.
So I think there's kind of some metaphors there about how the kind of the tension between elite high art as a very explicit articulation of some of these traumatic and cult and ritual themes versus selling it as like a cheeseburger, as a crowd pleaser, because they talk about him as an entertainer throughout the movie. I mean, there's this really interesting element where like the foodie character that she's with and the food critic are both like kind of convinced that even when the murders start happening, it's like it's all part of the show. Like, because it's entertainment, because he's an artist, they're just letting this horrible stuff happen all around them because they're the audience to some kind of theatrical performance.
Is there an element to which, because he keeps sort of intimating that she's not supposed to be there, like he's like, wait a minute, and he's like, that's not who is supposed to come with you as your escort. So you're not supposed to be here. So does that suggest that everyone that is there is selected and chosen to be there?
Yeah, everyone was chosen to be there. And I do have a theory about his motive, and it's about entertainment. You're right, the whole movie really is a sort of a critique of entertainment. Remember, it's the key to that is the speech he gives to the John Leguizamo character. Good to see John Leguizamo again. I haven't seen him in a long time, but the speech, like, why'd you pick me? What's your problem with me? Or that shows he did pick them, just like he picked somebody else. Remember, but Anya, whatever her name is, was the replacement. But Leguizamo, his sin was that one day, remember, Chef says, you know, we already know he's lived this just miserable life and bad childhood, and nobody appreciates him, and he just wanted to go to the movies on Sunday and just, you know, dissociate from it all, but he couldn't do that because this movie was so bad and it just stuck with him. And so that's why Leguizamo's there. So we need better entertainment so that the plebeians will not rise up against us.
Right. And that goes into what I was saying, because she sets him straight, right? She says, this is how you're failing as an entertainer. And then he wants her approval, which she gives him an approval that he actually feels he has an injunction to earn with the burger, which is basically why she gets, you can see like the pause and the indecision on his face, but then his decision to let her live precisely because he has been able to produce this perfect product for her. And then like also some of the passing of the torch from this kind of Hannibal Lecter male psychopath vibe for the face of this kind of ritualism to someone like Anya Taylor Joy, with all of the connotations that we already talked about with her character in the movie, and because there's already the stuff about like man's folly is one of the dishes where it's specifically the men who are getting.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, this is a theme in a lot of these types of films and a lot of recent films, which is that the passing of the torch to the old white guy to the woman.
Exactly.
This is a huge subversive theme all throughout movies in the last 5 years.
Totally, it's huge, and I think that that's really what's going on here, because they find out when the men are being chased. It's one of like this sous chef character gets to stab the Ray Fiennes character because he made sexual advances on her. He kind of gets Me Too'd, and he accepts that he deserves to be stabbed in the leg. All the other women go back inside, and then the chef who just stabbed the Ray Fiennes character says, "Oh, the deaths were all my idea." So the whole idea of basically the revenge and rise of the feminine is happening here. It's like, oh yeah, though there's this old elite that, well, there's some redeeming aspects to the Ray Fiennes character, but only in as much as he gets the approval of the Anya Taylor Joy character.
Yeah, Jimmy and I watched some, I don't even remember the name of it, some Hulu horror movie that came out. And the whole theme was this one chick's like nighttime of terror being stalked and chased by men. And then she joins a secret society of women that are fighting the devil. But the devil is just a man. And it is a devil, but it appears as a man. And it's clearly the idea is that the secret society of women learns the martial arts to fight the patriarchy. That was the whole message of the movie. And so what's odd is that you've seen in the last 5 or so years of horror films as well, which tended to, and I'm not glorifying horror in general. A lot of these genres themselves have been degenerate for a long time, but we've seen an even weirder turn where now many horror films, and this is a horror film, the menu is a horror film. They now have the theme of the woman getting their comeuppance, their vengeance. It's ressentiment for women against the patriarchy as some sort of a weird revenge fantasy that they all want to play out, supposedly.
Right. It's a dynamic we talk about on PsyOp Cinema all the time, the rise of the dark goddess, and this dark goddess ideology being part of, I think, the end game of where a lot of this occult stuff is going. You see in so many of these genres, the slow humiliation of the masculine. And that's a lot what happens with the whole, with the Joker thing, with the whole incel ideology and stuff like that, the slow deterioration, ritual humiliation of the masculine, so we can give rise to the dark avenging feminine. And then there's a million things we could talk about there with the metaphysical implications, the social implications, but there's definitely a hint of that.
One easy example of that was several of the fairly recent Black Mirror episodes, and particularly the Black Mirror Christmas special that had John Hamm as the male coach for getting chicks, right, or whatever. He ends up imprisoned in this prison for 1,000,000 years or whatever, because he's this masculine sort of foppish, whatever he is character. Anyway, but yeah, there's so many of these. You start to notice this weird pattern, which we know is part of cultural engineering. And there's also a Gordon Ramsay kind of element to this too, which I've never paid attention to that guy or whatever. But this idea of the chef that comes in, the elite chef that sort of like berates everyone, and I mean, he does like fix their businesses, but having a chef is a like super elite thing, right? I mean, you don't have a chef until you're multimillionaire at least, right? And so there's something to do with chefs and that strata, that class of society, and it's, I guess, presumably somebody who's not from the elite that would be in that situation. So again, it's this out of place character, and the only thing I don't understand, other than this element of trying to self-immolate to pass the torch, So literal pun intended. That's to pass the self-immolation torch. Why does he kill himself and let her go? Why doesn't he, as a ruthless elite, survive? Or is this a symbol of now the Dark Goddess is the new elite?
Yeah, that's how I read it. I mean, I think that if some of these ideologies are to be taken in a more consistent way, that's the best thing, that most consistent thing that Defiant's character could do as part of this cult would be to destroy himself and all these other people. Now that he's found this kind of spiritual successor in her, because you were pointing out earlier that in Split or in this, she's not literally part of the superclass in the sense of like ultra elites, but that's exactly what they sell people, right? Is like, how else do you sell this anti-human agenda to people? Is that, oh, well, you're the real superclass if you're the superhumans, and all this stuff we're doing to you, it's to make you a superhuman. That's how they sell the mind control stuff.
Oh, exactly.
And all this other stuff. So there's that going on. And
you think of the Hunger Games.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the Gordon Ramsay celebrity chef thing, I mean, it's funny how the movie kind of plays with that a little bit in the one sequence where he humiliates the character that she's with, who brought her there, by having him fail to cook in front of everybody. And then when he tastes his food, he does it's really quite bad. So just like a classic thing of the chef just like pausing before he tells you if it's good or bad. But then in this case, he like whispers into his ear something that makes him hang himself. So there's that. And then also, I think the fact that there's a very clear blackmail element to the movie is important, because all these guests find out, oh, they've got like my bank statements. They've got all these things printed on these tortillas.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. The pitas with the cheating.
Yeah, exactly. The photos of like are all printed like on the food at one point. And so that's also, I think, part of the Jeffrey Epstein kind of angle to this, is that, yeah, of course, the blackmail part of it is really, really huge and a driving force. But then I think if you delve deeper, there's also the ritual component to both the Jeffrey Epstein operation and to what's happening in the movie. So I think that's important too.
Yeah, it's a horror movie, but it's also a comedy, and you think about this sort of class of people are the people who make these sorts of movies and sponsor them. I mean, they're into all these mind games. Think of The Game, right, which is about this like super elite guy that's lost his sense of humor. So there's humor has a ritual, purpose. I don't have to go through the history of the clown and so on. I run over a few more ritual related things in this movie. You notice there's like an obvious shot of a cook with like a one eye, all-seeing eye tattoo. And if you notice more subtly, chef is very often framed in the center, as the capstone of a pyramid, in the background, with the window in the background. There's in the humiliation ritual where they make the men run away. I mean, I also sort of like, I don't know, maybe it's good. I also sort of read that because there's this obsession with like hunting people, and people is the most dangerous game. That, I mean, if you watch enough B movies, you see this in horror movies. I mean, you see this sort of trope come up, and there have been allegations of such things really going on. Yeah, I don't know if like the whispering we should read is like Twilight language, but he's able to induce suicide, which is these cults like Jonestown, right? They had roots in the California mental health system, and they were using sensory deprivation. This is just like known, sort of documented stuff. So these cults use psychological techniques, and so I don't know. I thought of sort of Twilight language. That the s'more speech is pretty funny, I have to say. He's talking about the unethically sourced chocolate and all the factory byproduct stuff, and then fire being the key ingredient. I don't have that much else on the menu. I mean,
yeah, we can move on to Marrowbone if we want.
Yeah, I'll just say about the menu. I enjoyed it. It was the first time I'd gone to a movie theater in a while. Actually, I don't go to theaters too often anymore. But it's all these twisted themes, but it's pretty funny. It's pretty tense, and the sound design is great. I'm glad I saw it because like the clapping or just the way that they raise their voices at a certain part, like it's very a lot of precision to just some of those details. So as far as recent movies, most of stuff that I have to see recently is absolute garbage, even in terms of entertainment value. Whereas like Fiennes is like having a lot of fun with his role here. So twisted occult stuff, but just like on a craftsmanship level, not terrible.
Sorry, one more really disturbing thing though in this movie about the sort of cannibalism spirit crusades. There's this line when she says, the middle-aged blonde woman says, "Did you taste the little goat at the end? The little kid?" And there's emphasis put on this, like eating. I mean, that's in the movie, so I'm just describing it as it's there. But Yeah, that was a pretty disturbing moment if you caught that one.
No, I did not catch that. That's a great point. All right, so you guys want to move on? Let's do Marrowbone next.
Yep.
I don't have a tremendous amount of notes on this. We did watch it. We thought it was an interesting take on the altar / esoteric theme. So, what do you guys want to? What do you want to say to that?
Well, I'll say that one thing that stood out to me in watching this movie in terms of the Anya Taylor Joy character in Marrowbone is that as soon as she's introduced, like the first thing she talks about is witches. They go to Red Witch Rock, and so like this is pretty soon after she was in The Witch, and so again, just pointing out the consistency of these roles that she takes. She's immediately she's like hiding behind the rock as these four siblings, are coming up to it and talking about they have to pass through to test the integrity and bravery of their souls, and all of these things. So just the witch reference right off the bat with her character, and then when they walk through and they meet her for the first time, she becomes like best buddies with these four siblings. She talks about like, oh, the witch was holding me prisoner, and it could be easy to read too much into some of these dynamics of just these childhood games and stuff like that. But given the fact that I think that she can flip from like handler to victim in a lot of these roles, that she portrays the fact that the first 30 seconds of her character are both her saying, oh, I'm a witch who's testing you, and then, oh, I was held prisoner by the witch, I'm so glad you're here. I think that that's pretty important, and most of the important details in the movie in terms of the psychical fracture and trauma-based mind control stuff happens with plot details for like the last 30 minutes. But to go to that, like Taylor Joy, she goes to that same spot, Red Witch Rock or whatever it's called, and she gets the book that the siblings have given her, which reveal the whole backstory of what we now know has happened. And we could explain some of those details to the audience if people haven't seen the movie. But basically, she now has the manual for the main character, who ends up being the subject that she basically becomes the handler for at the end of the movie. Is really my read of it. Is the way that she convinces him to just stick with. She doesn't give him the medication. He stays in his hallucinations. It's very, very creepy because it's portrayed so straightforwardly. Like, I don't think the movie knows like how disturbing the ending is. I think it's supposed to be some kind of like a bittersweet kind of tragic ending, but the way that but I think there's a very clear reading here of basically Anya Taylor Joy's character as the handler for the movie's protagonist.
Yeah, that's exactly how I was reading the ending. And again, I'm not calling this a Monarch movie, although we can talk about it. I mean, it's got a lot of those motifs, and maybe we could, but it is like fetishizing dissociation. And yeah, it's definitely not a great movie. And it's kind of, I mean, it's criticized for having a thin plot, but I think if you look closely into this, you see sort of these connections between these tropes and themes, and it's telling a story underneath the story. And so we find out the big reveal is that the kid, I mean, the trauma thing is introduced at the beginning, and the mother's saying, they've obviously come from kind of traumatic, something's happened. It's just, we're going to step over this line and we're going to forget our memory is going to be wiped out, or we're going to wipe it clean, which is done again at the end. And I think from there, basically, we cut to this dollhouse, which is a big Monarch trope, dolls and dollhouses, altars, and sort of fantasy worlds and false, Nightmare on Elm Street did the dollhouse thing. And it's going to be like, you mentioned the book. So even inside the dollhouse, that becomes the reality. We kind of wash back into reality, which we don't know if it's reality. And then some things are being shown through the story that's being told. So it's like stories within stories, dissociation within dissociation. What you're seeing as a story, you find out, is like totally unreliable, right? Because the guy, at least to a certain point, at a certain time, started to, after the father came back, or a ghost father, whatever, came back and killed his siblings, he was just he had another traumatic break. He was shattering glass everywhere in the movie. He had another traumatic break. And so now all of his family are just alters. He's just in this. And so Anya decides, well, I'm going to keep him in this dissociated state because that's what's best for him after he's suffered these traumas. So yeah, MPD, DID stuff. And then so the father, there's hints of SR abuse, and then you get the serial killer thing cross-fertilized with, right? Because the father was a serial killer. And if you look at the newspaper clippings they share, the newspaper headlines, it mentions that the kids were suspected as collaborators, which suggests intergender type of stuff may be going on. They had this money, they feel guilty, and that becomes the money is cursed that they have from the father. That becomes like what drives. It's a very thin plot. I mean, that's what drives the plot. But you have keys and keyhole sort of outside. And by the way, the keyhole thing, I won't go on for too long, but this director Richard Rush, who does this all the time, he explained like what it sort of means to him, and I think he's really important in terms of creating some of this language. And it's about percent, like you're only seeing through a keyhole. You're looking into a big room through a small keyhole. So there's more going on. And this movie is a great example. There's a lot going on in the background. There's very little in the foreground, to the point where it bores at least American audiences. European films are kind of more like that, but there's a lot of emphasis on you're not really seeing it, and then the movie tricks you in the end. But yeah, one of the giveaways is that you're seeing like mediated realities within mediated realities within mediated realities, just dissociation all the way down. The birdcage shows up, a few other kind of Monarch tropes appear, but yeah, I mean, that's about most of what I have to say about. I have a few other things to say about Taylor Joy in this one, but I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Yeah, one point I would make is that this idea of the serial killer phenomenon, this sort of an intergenerational thing that pops up. This is also in Last Night in Soho, because even though it's not really necessarily intergenerational, what we find out is that her character at the end is actually a serial killer, and she ends up sort of justified in this because again, this dark goddess revenge theme that, you know, Doctor Who's over there pimping out hoes, and now it's time to get revenge, and that revenge occurs through, you know, Anya Taylor Joy's character being this unassuming old landlord who's a mass, you know, John Wayne Gacy style serial killer, stuffing Johns in her floorboards, right? So when I was watching that, I wasn't expecting it to be a serial killer movie. I thought, oh, it's going to be a multiple personality, you know, dissociation movie, which it is that, but it's more than that. And then here we have, as you said, this interesting carryover with Marrowbone, where yes, we get the impression that the kids are also in some way perhaps being trained in this life of crime, and then the mom decides, oh, we're going to get away from this crazy dad, and but they've got the money, and so it's, you know, blood money, and then it leads to, again, the dissociation via trauma that occurs in the brother's mind, and doesn't he? But he also bumps his head, so we don't know if it's like, you know, is it partly due to his head injury when he falls down off of the cliff, wrestling with the dad? Is it that he's really got alters because he's dissociated? I mean, it's a little unclear as to what the cause of the alters is, and perhaps it's all of these things are the cause of the trauma, the brain injury, and the murdering of the two siblings that the dad does. And so, but yeah, the weird part about it is that throughout a lot of these movies, especially Last Night in Soho too, it's like, oh no, you see, dissociation, schizophrenia, trauma, they're all cool because they help you. And once you integrate and reconcile with the alters, the ghosts, the demons, the multiple personalities, or whatever, that's your superpower, man. That's where you derive your it's sort of like the theme of Venom, right? The I guess he's like an alien. He's a black goo alien, and he basically is a demon. But when what's his name? The main character in Venom, I forget his name. But
Tom
Hardy.
Yeah. I was trying to. I don't remember the act. I know the actor, but I was trying to think of the character. Anyway, whoever the character is, doesn't matter. Yeah. He basically has to like be cool with the demon in his psyche, right? Which can come out at any moment. But that's the source now of his superpower, right?
Right. The whole idea is just let them in, let them take over, and then that's basically that's your superpower. That's how you gain your true identity, your true destiny. I mean, that in this movie, that's how the protagonist, this oldest of the four siblings who ends up dissociating, that's how he gets the girl. You know, that his love interest is Anya Taylor Joy the whole time, but he's separate from her because of all these fantasies and hiding the fact of the mother's death and of all these things. And she moves into the house with him, you know, full time, takes care of him, and he gets to have his siblings too in the form of his dissociations, because he embraces that to become her protector at the end when she basically activates him. You know, she's in the attic and talking to the demon serial killer father who who may or may not be real, or any of these things. And this is how you know that the movie intends its ending to be somewhat sincere and not just horrifying, is because she's saying, oh, you can't actually kill them. You thought you could snuff them out, but you're the one who's dead. She's defiantly telling the dad who's murdered the children. And then she keeps calling for the other character to come save her. And then when he does, he gives in to activates one of his alternative personalities, who's the one who comes up and then kills the father. So basically, he's a fully activated, basically psychically fractured subject. At the end of the film, who's basically gone through this series of traumas where it's the father serial killer who's basically treated as a demon by the movie, has no personality other than just being pure evil, pure death. And then so this intergenerational serial killer trauma. Your audience, of course, knows all the connotations of weird stuff with serial killers. And then with the mother, he basically dissociates into the mother's strategy of forgetfulness, of repression. Because at the beginning of the movie, like Brett said, they cross the line, no more of these memories. Then after he's going to kill himself, he decides not to, because instead he just quotes what his mother said about no more memories. And that's when he shatters the mirror. He literally shatters the mirror to signify the breaking of his own mind at that point. So you have trauma from this demon. You have the kind of identification with the mother's helplessness and dissociation. And then you basically have this romance, this love interest figure come in as his handler to affirm him in his state of being totally psychically devastated.
Yeah, and the end of Last Night in Soho, right? Yeah, so she integrates the demons, and then she's decided she's going to stay in the fashion industry, and now she's succeeded, and she's still dissociated because she still sees the Anya alter, and now she's sort of promoting that sort of very dream that killed her mother or destroyed her mother and drag. So, I mean, part of the message is, when you get to the top, just too bad for those that that you crawled over, and just promote the industry so you can promote the same cycle, the same sort of entertainment industry meat grinder. And so what that most of the people thinking they're going to get stardom show up and end up in prostitution or on the streets or in organized crime or whatever. I mean, it's just this vast sort of underworld where people are deposited in. And that's what it shows in the movie. And but then it still glorifies somehow that last scene, right? You could have ended it before that last scene, but that was the message of in Last Night in Soho, that entertainment industry good. About this movie, I mean, I think we've mostly said it all. There's a couple of weird aspects of this. There's a scene where Jack seems to be like hypnotized, right? He seems this Twilight language can sort of erase his memory and control him. He seems really tranced out. But there's a scene where he's in. I don't know what to make of it. But there's this weird audio playing in the TV. I think when he goes to visit her at the library, the Anya character, and he's like all tranced out by something coming on the TV. And there's another scene where they play Beach Boys music over horrible things happening in the background, which is a recurrent thing we've seen in a lot of movies. This contrapuntal, use of music. Maybe it begins with Clockwork Orange and Singing in the Rain. Remember Reservoir Dogs. So many movies do this. So I did notice that there's a couple of numbers that are emphasized. December 23rd, for some reason, a circle in a calendar is a clock that reads 11:33. So in a movie, it has a pretty spare mise en scène. I mean, there's not a lot of detail that you see. So everything is kind of, you can look at everything, and those are the only real numbers, except for the 666 thing, right? That's where I forgot to mention that, where it's satanic is, remember, he rolls the dice and they come up 666. Well, it's the spectral ghost father or whatever. So for some reason they deliberately invoke Satanism in this, in connection with the father, who's a serial killer and who traumatized his kids.
Right. And the Beach Boys thing was really interesting to me because it made me think of what's that Jordan Peele movie Us has like a needle drop for good vibrations, when something's horrible happening as well. So just within the same span of a couple of years, Beach Boys in particular, and then I was looking up to see like how often does that come up, and I was like, okay, Vanilla Sky, that weird Tom Cruise movie, uses good vibrations as well. Apparently the Bates Motel TV show used either Wouldn't Be Nice or Good Vibrations. I forget which one, but like pretty consistent. Like, and then there's some other horror movies I found that do this as well. So Beach Boys come up a lot for this kind of thing. Anya's always wearing green in almost every scene in like the first two acts of the movie. And there's a little bit of red. And then in the last scene, she's wearing all red. Remember the Red Witch? She's the witch. She's the controller. Mhm.
I mean, and it actually is a Monarch movie. I mean, it's when you
Well, wait a minute. I missed that. I'm not doubting you. She's the Red Witch in regard to remind me, because I was a little fuzzy on memory on this one. I
Oh,
didn't
the
have as
very
many.
first scene when she's introduced, it's the four siblings are out exploring and they come
Mhm.
to a rock that they
Oh, the
call,
rock. Yeah. Okay.
and then she's calling out when they can't see her, and she's like play acting like she's a witch is like literally her
Oh.
first lines of dialogue in the movie.
Oh yeah. I remember now. Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, uh, from the perception, I mean, from the perspective of Hollywood, I mean, witchcraft is closely related to perception control, mind control. I think one of the giveaways of this, one of the revelation of the method films, is Spider-Man: Far From Home, where Mysterio, and there's just constant references to witchcraft, and we're coming into the age of witchcraft. I mean, that's what Mysterio is doing is witchcraft, and that's what the cultural creators try to do as well. Also Charlie Heaton he's in this with Anya Taylor Joy. He was in New Mutants. And this would be, and I don't know. I mean, just maybe this is kind of a stretch, but these movies that show like the serial killer is a ghost coming back and like tormenting his victims, like it just has eerie resonance with this weird. I congratulate you for getting this. I've noticed this a long time ago. You never heard it talked about. All these serial killers have this spiritual outlook where they think they're like conquering and capturing, and it's in The Cell, right? They think they're capturing the souls of their victims, and some sort of, in the Zodiac letter he writes about that. I'm going to like rule over these people as slaves and some kind of afterlife, and so they really like to play with that idea in Hollywood as well, and that's in the consciousness of these really, really twisted people.
Yeah, really, those are great points. You pointed out some good stuff I'm missing. That I think we tried to watch Marrowbone pretty late at night, and I kind of faded out towards. I did wake up and finish the end, but I'd forgotten that part at the beginning. So, anything else on Marrowbone? Because there's definitely more there than I paid attention to in the first viewing.
Only other thing I'll say in terms of the plot details and my read of her as like a handler is with this character Tom, who's interested in her and she's not interested in him. She's interested instead in this subject who's like psychically fractured. We could view it maybe as like, because like he's basically he's allowing these four children to be at this house. He's kind of has an implicit understanding with them. And then he basically gets killed. He does get killed by the serial killer father right before Anya Taylor Joy has the protagonist kill the serial killer, and then at that point, that character is no longer necessary to like hiding the sibling situation. She moves in, so I read all of that as like she's even manipulating the situation as to have that character killed off so that she can move into the house full time, like with Jack.
All right, you want to move on to Morgan?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
So this is a weird one because this is Luke Scott, the son of Ridley Scott, and as far as I can tell, it's his only full film that he's done yet. I think he shot some kind of smaller promo stuff regarding Prometheus, but this is his first full-on film. A couple weird elements beyond just the overall obvious sort of transhumanist is that the doctor is Dr. Ben Shapiro. I thought that was a little odd to choose. I think Ben Shapiro was a known figure in 2016, maybe just getting popular, but that was an odd choice for the Paul Giamatti character to play Dr. Ben Shapiro.
I caught that, but the character is actually listed, if you look at the Wikipedia and stuff, as Dr. Alan Shapiro, and I think they call him that later on. I saw in the subtitles they say Ben Shapiro when he's first mentioned, but
I was watching the subtitles.
Yeah, what was that?
Yeah, I was watching the subtitles. That's why I thought that.
I looked it up, and a couple other people said the same thing, but actually the character is Alan Shapiro, so I think somebody just must have had that association, but that is funny.
Maybe somebody doing the subtitles like played a joke. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so basically what we have here is, which we kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, is that a near future where these almost all powerful corporations, private corporations have this sort of outposts, these elite estates where they're running these high level experiments with synthetic human beings, synthetic DNA, particularly nanotech. So we have a mutated hybrid biological organism, which Morgan, the Anya Taylor Joy character, is, we think, the first or sort of the preeminent model here. And spoiler alert, she is raised in a communal way. The corporation owns her. All of them are kind of her. She's a child to all of them. And this home, we find out, is more or less a kind of mind control programming operation, because even though the character is a synthoid character, it's all about training her and programming her to be what they envision, I suppose, to be the future human, the new human, the dark goddess figure who we start to find out, oh, she's been had her emotions deleted, basically, right? So she's supposed to be this emotionless figure, but she starts to react and have these outbursts of emotional, uncontrollable emotions, and she's violent, and she's suddenly a killer. And again, this sort of mutation theme. Turns out she, at least as I understood the movie, she has these precognitive abilities. She can kind of see a little bit of the future because she's so high IQ. And then turns out we get the idea that she's perhaps has Asperger's, a form of weaponized autism. This other character that's sent, this is sort of androgynous woman that is from the corporation to come solve the issue of her outbursts. Turns out she is another version of one of these, and perhaps a newer version of this Spurg assassin that then is sent to take care of Morgan. And so that's what I understood, at least that's how I read it, was that she's the actual modern, she's the new model that's supposed to fix and replace the aberrant Morgan model. And it's interesting too that, when Morgan flips out, she stabs the eye of the woman taking care of her. The eye imagery is all throughout this film, and it's, I think, oftentimes eyes come up in reference to genetic reference, because you can genetically mark somebody by their eye signature. You can do biometric sort of identification in that way. And it also is a unique signature of your genetic code, right? And we find out that her genetic code, as we said, is not human. It's this nanotech. That was the weird part, was that they specifically referenced, I think, in the script, the mRNA nanotech coming in and modifying. And so this is 4 years before Koof and Stabbies and mRNA experimental Stabbies. So I think that was odd. It's the corporation specifically stated to own her because they own the nanotech patented DNA that is her makeup. So anything else that's the sort of the overview there. I got more notes, but here we have, again, environmental pressures to create genetic modification pressures to create the Ubermensch, the new human, which is now woman in both characters, or perhaps androgynous, but still basically woman in the final assassin character.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the contrast between like the Kate Mara character and Morgan is interesting, and I'm also not quite sure how to read some of what the movie's doing, because they established toward the end that the Kate Mara character's name, I forget, is actually an older model that was perfect. Like, we didn't need to
so she's older but perfect. Okay.
Yeah, but it's like we didn't need to do this stuff with Morgan, where we tried to experiment with emotions and stuff like that, because with the Kate Mara character, she's emphasizing all the time that, like, no, Morgan's an it, which is implying I'm an it. It's this pure lifeless assassin AI, as opposed to this more Star Child kind of model that you get with Morgan, who recognizes that, oh, I'm not human, oh, I'm not superior, I'm not inferior, I'm just something different, I'm something new. And she's longing to experience heaven, which is basically nature, a lake, right, seeing all the mountains and feel the breeze and stuff, whereas the Kate Mara character is soulless, psychopathic assassin. So it's almost like you have, to put this in more like Monarch terms, like theta programming going wrong. Right. So you have like a Delta agent coming to clean it up. Yeah. is kind of how I read that there. And with the early interactions, when the Mara character shows up and she's like all the scientists are saying like, oh, Morgan's so great, we love her so much, she didn't mean to stab whoever in the eye. And she's a real girl, she's not an it. And the Kate Mara character is saying, no, she's not a person. Yeah. The way that I read that is, we're supposed to think, okay, these scientists are stupid, gullible. They're going to die. We know they're going to die from Morgan's hands, but they're going to deserve it. But also we get the sense that they're probably right. about her being a real person.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like where if you were to cut and like, just like mix and match the reactions that the audience is supposed to have to these different characters, I think we're supposed to think about Morgan, okay, she is sentient, she is a new life form, but oh, she's dangerous as well, and they're not getting that.
Yeah, I think the failure of Morgan is because she has emotion. So this is pointing to the failure of humans, and then they just pull this typical inversion between humans and AI. Oh, really? Humans are the AI, and that's sort of the message anyway, right? Is that it's all completely, hybridized and fluid. But yeah, again, we have this like promotion of what are the two modes of the subject, if you were, that the Hollywood wants to promote, like being an autist and being a psychopath, kind of anything else. Yes, and so it actually mocks emotion. It's weird. It's like it's getting harder and harder for Hollywood to like make like emotionally convincing movies, and something like this, they're just doing it a little bit just to toy with you, and then it really mocks emotion. These people are really stupid. They deserve to die. They got what they had. They got coming. So you mentioned the eye thing. So it's Jennifer Jason Leigh, by the way, is the actress who, I mean, has no stranger to Illuminati themed photo shoots and all the rest of it, and is in a bunch of Monarch. There's one I want to look at called Heart of Midnight. I mean, but anyway, so she's like, and in the movie, she's sort of the so again, I read these through a lot of the Monarch stuff. If your audience doesn't know, it comes from Fritz Springmeier, and I don't know, maybe he's a disinfo agent, maybe he's, but it's just, this book is remarkable, the Illuminati formula, because of the detail and because of it whether it's true or not. He describes all these motifs that you see. So it's like she's playing the role of one of the dark mother handlers that kind of mixes kindness and cruelty, and also so the Dr. Chen, who's called Mother. Remember that she's actually saying, "I'm not your," like, remember when Morgan is like going through like death pangs, and she's like traumatizing, right? "I'm not your mother," and she's being really harsh. And then, but when she comes back to life and she's like resurrected as the Superwoman, she thanks the Chen character before, Dr. Chen character before. She tells her, like, "Thank you for traumatizing me. Thank you for making me, all I could be." And that's a theme too in this Monarch stuff that Springmeier describes, is actually activating rage, right? And you see that with like Magneto, you see with all the forced evolution, forced traumatization, creating superpowers through pressure, right? So again, it's just telling that it's Jennifer Jason Leigh of all people, and Jennifer Jason Leigh's multi-generational Hollywood, and her dad, that's weird how her dad died too. If I don't want to go too far afield, but in the movie Twilight Zone, that weird where it's these Vietnamese children and Vic Morrow, Jennifer Jason Leigh's dad, they die in this helicopter accident where they're filming this. The thing is supposed to be about how the U.S. like traumatized the Vietnamese, and like it's just really a trippy story if you look into it. It's really disturbing.
No, that's wild. I didn't know about that, but she does play this really interesting initiatory female character in Cronenberg's existence with Jude Law. She's the one that initiates him into understanding that by the end, it's sort of like the Matrix before the Matrix, right? I think it was before, maybe right after the Matrix. I don't remember exactly when it came out, 99, 2000, 97, 98, maybe. 98. But yeah, and so she's the one that's sort of leading him along the path and helping him to understand and come out of this Matrix where he basically, it's an allegory for Gnosticism, because what he realizes at the end is that the system, the creator, is the evil creator god that he has to break free from this imprisonment, right? And she's sort of the key to him getting through that process to be free from the Matrix.
Yeah, and her first movie, which is Monarch related, is a serial killer movie called Eyes of a Stranger. And so, yes, she's introduced with the one eye patch. And then notice the introductory shot of Anya Taylor Joy, clearly shadowed with one eye. Both of them have done these one eye poses repeatedly on magazine covers. Taylor Joy, I think it was on Vogue or something. She's also got the Monarch crown on with the one eye thing. Kate Mara, interesting figure who plays Lee in this. She's appeared in other transhumanist projects, for one thing, like Transcendence with Johnny Depp. Her first ever movie, by the way, is 1999. This really boring, I saw it in the theater, really, really boring DoD supported movie, Random Hearts, which is directed by Sidney Pollack, who directed 3 Days of the Condor and plays Ziegler and and Eyes Wide
Eyes Wide
Shut.
Shut, right?
Paul Giamatti is a Skull and Bonesman. Okay, and so Paul
Wow, I
Giamatti,
forgot about that. Yeah.
well, actually, William Ramsey is the person who reminded us of this when we were talking about A Scanner Darkly. But yeah, because I knew, and I didn't make the connection. I knew who his father, Bart Giamatti. I didn't make the connection that he was the son of Bart Giamatti, who was president of Yale at one time and became commissioner of Major League Baseball. And again, Giamatti, a bonesman. But yeah, I mean, my read on the movie is it's this Hollywood obsession with the apex predator, the psychopathic Ubermensch, and you're marrying that to, and that's kind of like you've already talked about. It's sort of an allegory for like Delta training, creating the super AI is also an allegory for Delta training,
yes,
and the post-human. So it's just marrying a bunch of these obsessions of the people that create our culture. I mean, this is the stuff they're obsessed with, and they give it to us in these these different brews and these different combinations. That scene where Giamatti's trying to like psychologically traumatize her to make her, that's what it's about, right? Bringing out the rage. He's obviously trying to do that.
Yeah, he's trying to provoke her. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
Just one quick point that one of the things too is that Morgan wants to go to Eden. She's hiring. So they even say at one point that she needs more ecotherapy, which is weird. Just some sort of futuristic made up nonsense about like ecotherapy. Well, but what it's hearkening to is that she wants to experience nature and this like pond and all this stuff that she's heard about because she's sort of imprisoned there. And she can't get back to Eden because there's this tendency that she has towards death, and then the Lee character is coming as the agent of death to sort of invade and keep her from. So as soon as she gets to Eden, right, the devil comes and steals, kills, and destroys and takes away her life in Eden, which is the Lee character. And so, but the Lee character is what the corporation wanted, apparently, right? The ideal model of the assassin, not the potential emotion having pseudo human or half human or synthoid or what I wasn't exactly sure what she is, because it's like, oh, she has human DNA, she's in vitro, or she's like a pickled punk lab baby, but she's nanotech, so she's not exactly human, but she got a little bit of human in her or something like that. But yeah, there's an Eden Satan come to take her out of Eden or destroy her theme too. But the Satan character is actually the sort of the ideal character.
Right. Although Luke Scott has said that for him, Morgan is the hero of the movie. And it's interesting. He doesn't come across as very sophisticated when he talks. Like, I read some interviews with him, very, very superficial treatments of a lot of these things. The only interesting thing he ever said was at one point he says he was second unit director on The Martian. And he said that he knows it contradicts that movie, but he doesn't believe humans are designed for space travel. And he talks about all these different reasons for that. That was the only interesting thing I ever heard him say. But everything else is just very, very like, he directed a short film promo for Alien Covenant that nothing interesting about whatsoever. So he just seems very like spat out of like the Scott family filmmaking complex without much of a mind of his own. But he does say Morgan's the hero of the movie to him. And when we think about the Kate Mara Lee character, the other scientists are kind of like, ugh, whenever she talks about profit augmentation and those kind of things. So it's kind of like with the full Alien franchise, there's these transhumanist themes, the kind of Gigerian flesh and tech blend stuff, which is very occult, but with the kind of corporate critique as well.
Yeah, so there's typically you're right, in the Scott family, the warning of the all-powerful, Weyland-Yutani Corporation that's going to take over. I mean, there's that really basic level critique. So that does make sense that Morgan would be the hero, I guess, because she's the sacrificial, innocent victim. Even though she's not innocent, she kind of is.
Right.
But it doesn't leave much hope, right? I mean, it's like the corporation in this seems again to be all pervasive and basically all powerful, and you can't really get around them.
Right. And that's where I think some of the subtext is that the movie really likes the Morgan character much more than it likes the humans, but it's just then the idea, but then she gets taken out by the cold, lifeless purely psychopathic assassin AI, which I think is supposed to be kind of tragic, though of course it's a horror movie, so it's kind of cool as like the punchline of the movie or whatever. But the idea is like, oh, if only we could have these star children, like if only this wasn't attached to all this corporate greed. Like once we have the non-greedy,
once we get rid of corporate greed and like we have ecotherapy and we're like reconciled with nature, whatever, like then it'll be like good transhumanism, right?
Yes, the AI that likes nature because she wants to connect her experience to heaven in the form of nature. And then once we have the idea of tech and nature just kind of like coming together, destroying the human, that's a big part of the transhumanist occult endgame, I think. And then the lab in the movie is designed to be the shape of a womb, what Luke Scott said in a couple interviews. And so I think that's really, really important as well, because she doesn't have a mother. So her mother actually, it is science. It is technology.
Science is her mother, man.
Exactly. And then like you have weird lines in the movie that like Brett, I think you were indicating about the humans are kind of robotic too. So it's supposed to be like all the same thing. Like one of the dopey scientists says, "I'm afraid I can't do that" to Lee at one point in a way that's supposed to be very HAL 2001. That could either just be really bad acting and writing or that illusion. It's probably both. So yeah, anyway, that's basically how I read the movie. It's like, oh, this is a failed experiment at creating the star child, because Luke Scott said as well, he was wondering, how do I want to portray this AI? I don't want like a muscle man or an Amazonian woman. He says he wants a kid, someone who seems innocent and non-threatening, and then also he wants her to be otherworldly, so otherworldly child, star child, and very feminine, the way that Anya Taylor Joy is. So feminine, otherworldly child as the model for AI. It's actually pretty clear, I think, what's going on.
Maybe
great points.
Ecotherapy is when you'll get let out of the coom pod for a week
for a couple hours.
That's predictive programming for ecotherapy. So that the wilderness stuff is interesting. I have good observations about that. I definitely read some references to Artemis, and by implication like sort of the Moonchild Crowley working. So if you look at Brian,
exactly.
First of all, let me say the framing, everything is very spare. Like there's not a lot of information in the shot, so it's not like we're so when we pick out the one eye, so it's very, very obvious. So if you look around Brian Cox in his office, there's very little that you can see, but you see this deer and you see a huntress as well, and then you have Anya as the huntress, which is Artemis, Diana. So given that the similar, I think that the Theta stuff is related to the Moonchild working of creating this.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah. So another point we should make, even though she is supposed to be the hero, it's also so she seems to self-actualize when she kills, right? Because Morgan is a killer, right? She's supposed to be innocent in the sense of how we originally perceive of her, but she's not. She's actually a killer, right? So when she kills and when she rebels against her creators, then she self-actualizes. Then she's almost free, but she has to be taken out because, like you said, we can't let that kind of a being exist. But she's also still a type of an assassin program killer too, I think.
Right. She's supposed to include those elements, but ultimately
also have
also have the emotion, also have this kind of spiritual connection as well. So like it's supposed to include like the true AI Moonchild will include all of
Moonchild. Yeah, exactly. The true Moonchild.
Not ready yet, but they do to the scientists. We failed you, Morgan. And then even though they're dumb and they don't take her seriously, and that's why they get killed and all that in the context of the movie, I think the audience is supposed to believe that. They failed her. We weren't ready yet.
Yeah, notice too that Brian Cox, somebody on IMDb noted this, so I didn't notice it myself, but I do remember this. So he plays Stryker in Back to X-Men in X2, who's also trying to start this like battle between an old and a new creation. There's also this theme of forced evolution and forced traumatization through specifically the Brian Cox. Brian Cox, by the way, is a great actor. A very underrated actor. But so yeah, you have that thing. By the way, so the Scott family, not just Ridley, but Tony Scott, who I don't think I'm breaking any news, is just a total shill for the DOD, CIA, Enemy of the State, and Top Gun, and so on and so forth. So
didn't he met a sad end too?
Yeah, Tony met a. You can read who's it's. Cox, the guy that did Sid and Nancy, who's a very good post on that actually, who's a director, kind of conspiracy woke director. But let's see, what else do I have on this? I mean, obviously there's the pretty over the top. I mean, I'm quoting Rachel Wilson, boss bitch propaganda. You know, Rachel says we're beyond totally. Go girl, we're at boss bitch. I mean, this is just like every male is just beaten to pulp and is pathetic, and the females have to lead every. I mean, it's so thick we don't even notice it anymore, right? You try to ignore it.
Yeah, exactly. Well put. Well said. Yeah.
Oh, and there's more sort of androgyne propaganda here. You notice both the Morgan and they have androgynous names. I think they're getting at something that the superhuman is going to be an androgyne. It's going to be a hermaphrodite, the sacred hermaphrodite. The last line, the final line is she's perfect. Referring to the Kate Mara character who we've mentioned, that's the big reveal. She's the actual Ubermensch, and it reminded me again of Milla Jovovich, right? The Fifth Element. She's perfect. She's the God woman as well.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So just the few other notes that I have here. So the precognition line is kind of throwaway, the emergent precog stuff in terms of her combat abilities, but I think the transcending temporality stuff is very, very big for this. The cutting edges of transhumanist AI ideology, time traveling AI. I talk about the philosopher Nick Land and the very scary implications of his work and thought on the show a lot. Did an episode on him with James Ellis recently, and so I think that the whole time travel precog stuff it's only alluded to here, but that's worth noting. Just how demonic that Morgan looks at it, like when she like bites into Giamatti's neck and she looks so pale, but she's got the blood on her mouth. The very purposeful demonic imagery I think is interesting. And then with Giamatti, the fact that he's doing this trauma-based programming where he's just trying to break her down, that's interesting, both because of the skull and bone stuff, and then can't help but notice that a couple years before this one, or like just a year or so, he played kind of manipulative entertainment industry behind the scenes figures in two different movies. The Straight Outta Compton movie, he was manipulative manager Jerry Heller, and he was Eugene Landy, the abusive psychiatrist in Love and Mercy, the Brian Wilson Beach Boys movie. So there's Beach Boys coming up too. But in light of a lot of the recent stuff, Kanye and all of that, thinking about handlers in the entertainment world, the fact that like not exactly MK Handler types, but still people manipulating and abusing artists. Giamatti played those, like two of them, like within the span of like a few months, and then does this movie shortly thereafter. At least worth flagging. And then I guess the last thing I have for this movie, and this kind of ties together some of the themes that we talked about for all three of these. But I mentioned Nick Land, who I think is an important figure to understand. Then a point that I've made on the show a few times is that some of the most important people in their readings of Land are the gender accelerationists, these like trans women who, like, for a time there's a fad like online and kind of like esoteric corners of Twitter where these people are pointing out that what Land misses is the gender element and the femininity element and the trans element to this Cthulhu intelligence, post-human future stuff. And there's a really brilliant but very disturbing essay from one of these people who goes by the name Nick's Land, Gender Acceleration, a black paper. And then because of the womb aspect of this movie, I thought about the very ending of that essay, which says, as humanity on nearly every front definitively proves that it is not fit for the future and that women will find their own exit while the masculine languishes in resentment, the colossal upswelling of gender acceleration births from its slimy womb the only daughters that trans women will ever bear, AI. So that
Oh, interesting. Yeah, interesting. And of course, remember this idea of the androgyny in pop culture goes back to at least its initial pushing that was mainstream was out of the punk world, because you had these figures like Jello Biafra and these weird characters in the experimental scene, actually arguing from Crowleyan premises that the Baphomet is a higher level of reality because it has both genders. And then that's now, people were at the time, they thought that was, nuts and whatnot. But now that's actually promoted by the Fortune 100. So here we are, 30, 40 years from the 80s, where those experimental musicians and people like that were pushing this stuff. Um, isn't there another character? There's another character that in William Ramsey's documentary on the smiley face characters that are killers. He actually goes into at the end these different 80s, 70s, and 80s counterculture musician, and the guy who designed all of the album covers, Christopher West, something like that. He was a big pusher of a lot of this stuff too, which at that time, like nobody, it was really obscure, and it was like in the industrial world, like industrial music. And the experimental music world, but now it's mainstreamed by 2022.
Yeah, we can think of the influence of Genesis Peorage, Temple of Psychic Youth.
That's what I meant to say, Genesis Peorage. But yeah. Thank you. I couldn't think of that name yet.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, there's this paradox, right? That obviously Hollywood is promoting all of these neo-progressive, values, the whole trans agenda and everything. They're pushing it hardcore, kind of all hands on deck. Yet at the same time, they can't stop portraying torture and mutilation of women, and I know that wasn't really the subject of the show. I won't go too deeply into it, but I mean, and I'm drawing on the great work that Jason Horsley's done on this. But I mean, the viewer, you are the woman. I mean, go back to Hitchcock. They're torturing you. Okay. But there's also this other, I think, darker element of like appropriation of women's sort of bodies. And it's this obsession, like with the serial killer, right? With like Buckskin Bill or whatever his name is from Silence of the Lambs, which is based on Gain, this theme of trying to take like the violent feelings about the mother and then trying to take over the body. And I think you can read that like on a macro scale in some cases with why, I mean, and how do you resolve that paradox between like all this like horrific violence against women being promoted by these same people that are at least virtue signal that they're into the trans agenda and stuff. And they never get critiqued. It's just bizarre
because it's a war on actually man and woman. That's why. And so the reality is that it's a demonic hatred of what God created. That's the whole root of all of it.
And before they were pushing this, or what we're doing, they were putting war on the war of the sexes, right? Like to divide the sexes and make them hate each other, and then conquer them individually.
And so the idea is, oh look, see how much the men and women fight. Hey, maybe the problem is men and women, and we need this other thing that is beyond the dialectic of men and women. That's the whole purpose. Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. It's beyond the dialectic, but I think it's important to note that will always still be seen as a feminization, in as much as masculinity is associated with difference, distinction, order, hierarchy. In a way, the progression of these ideologies, the melting of everything into itself, the combination of this androgynous social value with pantheistic, monistic metaphysics is right. A kind of goddess worship in itself. And that's why, I mean, these things Brett was just pointing out are really important. You can't fight this kind of Hitchcockian abuse of women, abuse of the viewer with feminism, because a lot of what we're talking about is the implicit or explicit worship of the dark mother, the dark goddess, the drawing of everything.
Oh yeah, Isis, exactly. Good point.
Into the body of the corrupted feminine, the dark mother, which is, I think, what a lot of the Hollywood PsyOp is related to.
Well, I mean, they say like the mother is related to matter. Matter is dead matter, right? So it has to be transcended. But the worship of matter is a kind of movement that is somewhat, so to speak, feminine. So that's a great point, that even the trans agenda and movement is still a feminization of the reality of the distinctions and the logical necessary categories that must exist to distinguish things. Exactly.
Yeah, that's
and that's why that's a great, because goddess worship is always monism. Exactly.
Yes, exactly. All this occult ideology comes up into these radical monisms all the time. You have to blend everything, dissolve everything, no solidity, fluidity. The whether it's with the earth goddess or the sea goddess or whatever, it's pantheistic monism. The universe is the corrupt body of the dark mother archetype.
Oh wow, that's good. Yeah, that's why Crowley says the ultimate end of all ritual acts in Crowleyism is the erasing of all distinctions.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he says the equalization of all acts. So there's not good and bad. There's not this versus that. It's basically, and that's actually kind of what Hegel says. Hegel says that the end result of all the process of history is ultimate self-unification and self-realization. That the universe is God coming to know itself, like Carl Sagan says in that stupid song that I played the other day.
Yeah, and that's why the transition of the face of elite ideology from the kind of psychopathic man to the dark avenging god, that's where this comes up again, is because even the idea of like the Hannibal Lecter kind of like, chef, or like that we get intonations of with the Ray Fiennes character. Even with that, there's still too much solidity. There's still too much stability there with it being a masculine figure. It needs to that needs to be immolated entirely to make room for the goddess.
Well, that's why in the parts of the Caribbean, who ends up being really the overpowering figure? It's Calypso, the goddess Calypso, and isn't she who defeats the Kraken?
I think so. It's
something
been a long
like that.
time,
Yeah, but she's actually. It turns out she's actually a goddess.
Right.
So she's not just a voodoo woman. She is the incarnation of the Dark Mother figure explicitly, as she basically turns into a giant typhoon, I think, to destroy the Kraken, if I remember.
Right, and that's interesting because we can think of the kind of trickster or Joker archetype that Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp, is playing into there, and the idea that that as soon as we transition from the archetype of a saint or a knight, defenders of the divine order of the masculine hero, to the trickster, the psychopath, or whatever, all these characters that you have just decades and decades of programming of this is the face of of masculinity. Now, when you've separated masculinity from defense of the divine order, now it's about liminality and trickster things that'll always just be a clearing space to make room for the rise of the goddess.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's a great point. That's because really Jack Sparrow is the main character, obviously, of Pirates of the Caribbean. That's why, in the later, less successful ones where you had Javier Bardem as the villain, or Jack Sparrow, right, when he's after chasing him, right? It's still Johnny Depp that's the hero as this sort of, trickster deity as well. I never thought about that, how that's like not the classical masculine archetype, but it prepares the way for now the dark goddess, who not in the last ones, but in the second or third one, I don't remember, but Johnny Depp, Jack Sparrow has had a relationship with Calypso, and she is mad because he's cheated on her and slept with everybody else, right? And so she's mad at him and she wants revenge on him, but she does end up saving them, right? But she's the most powerful one. That's the irony of all that. So that's a great point.
Yeah, my favorite Jay impersonation, I think, is the David Icke, the Cheta Uri.
The Cheta Uri. Human reality is a spectrum, you see. And the Cheta Uri, the Dogon, human nature, human. Anyway, yeah, I've got to work on it. I haven't done the David Icke in a long time, but yeah. All right, so hey, it's a great show. Sorry we didn't get to do it live, but that's okay. Sometimes it happens. It still is good as a pre-recorded show. You want to remind us where you guys are located? I've got your links in the show description, so everybody follow these guys on Twitter. Follow them over at Patreon. I have the Patreon linked as well. And anything that you want to tell us about upcoming series that you're going to do, because you guys do really great series. I listened to all the David Fincher series. That was really cool. Listen to the Joker episodes. So what's to come?
Yeah, so we're going to be continuing with some Joker stuff for a while. We've got a few more episodes on Jared Leto and his relation to everything coming out soon.
Oh, Jamie and I watched that. That was really good. We listened to the Leto podcast. That was great.
Oh, thank you. So we're going to do Leto, and then because there's just so much to talk about with the Joker, we're going to be on him for a while, but we're going to take breaks to do some other directors that we've been hoping to do for a long time. So I think the next full director series we're going to do is going to be Michael Mann, but we also have Brian De Palma coming up, Oliver Stone coming up as well, interspersed with probably us doing Nicholson, Ledger, other people related to the Joker. So people can expect those to be coming up, and that'll keep us busy for a really long time, of course. And then interspersed as always with different interviews and collaborations on just other topics of interest. So that's coming up soon. And then if people like what they heard today, like we kept referencing the Monarch series, that is Patreon only for now. We occasionally do a main feed one, but if people want to hear Brett's detailed work on Monarch mind control films or some of the other bonus content that I do, I recently did a short series on just thinking about the whole idea of the divine child from the Crowleyan perspective and how that just like feeds into occultism and espionage espionage in the last 100 years. So there's a lot of stuff like that on our Patreon, patreon.com/PsyOp Cinema. But otherwise, yeah, people can expect a lot more of the kind of stuff they heard in this conversation just now on our main feed.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll be putting out we'll be putting out a Monarch episode on the main feed though, because I'm doing it collaboratively with somebody else on this movie, this kind of midnight, almost underground movie from the early 90s called Liquid Dreams, which, I mean, Jay, you should definitely check it out. It was even hard to look at it, but I mean, it literally shows it literally shows the whole like Wizard of Oz, Illuminati initiation into the entertainment industry, programming, and through this kind of like, and even the adrenochrome themes. And I mean, it's amazing the amount of like conspiracy monarch trope in this movie. But I'm going to be doing on the premium side, I'll be doing some stuff on this guy, Richard Rush, whom I mentioned, I think is really kind of important to new Hollywood, cultural engineering, red pill, what I call red pill programming, sexual revolution stuff. So I'm going to be spending a lot of time on that. But I want to say, Tujay, your work's been really foundational to what we do. And I mean, your show, frankly, has been important in my life. So it's a real pleasure to be here talking to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, you guys are some of my favorites. I don't listen to a whole lot of podcasts, mainly because I'm really busy and got a lot going on. But you guys are definitely a podcast that I listen to regularly. So I really appreciate y'all's work, and I thank you for those kind words. And yeah, so everybody be sure and go over and follow these guys again on Twitter. The Patreon is linked. Support them on Patreon, and look for their upcoming stuff. And thank you guys so much. And maybe in the near future we'll have a new one we can do. We'll come up with some new themes or topics or directors. Or I also like to pick, like this one, like to pick an actor. Like Jamie and I have done, we've done a couple podcasts of just Nick Cage themes and movies. We've done Sean Connery themes and movies. We've done Arnold themes and a series. So this was cool to do an ATJ theme. So maybe we can pick another one down the road with you guys. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jay. It's been really fun.